Welcome back to the channel. This is Trendy Storm, and you are watching second and final part of What If Kid Naruto Awakens Scorch release with the help of Kyuubi. If you enjoy this video, please like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Not wasting no more time. Let's start the story.
While doing this, Neji hit Naruto, who appeared to flex his body in an impossible way before launching 3 accurate two-fingered blows at Neji, who had to take them as he leapt back. You might be a genius, Neji, but Hinata-chan is a genius among geniuses. You only prevailed because Hinata is too sympathetic to you, Hyugas. But I'm not Hinata. Naruto sobbed while keeping his gaze fixed on Hiyashi, who laughed ominously. Neji was unsure of how to respond to that response, so he adopted the Juken stance in preparation for a real fight. Oh, you want to turn this into a taijutsu battle? Then by all means, let me demonstrate to you how much your taijutsu differs from Hinata-chan's. Neji charged the blonde Jinchuriki, striking at him in intricate Juken patterns, but Naruto evenly dodged and returned fire, not believing what he was seeing. She beat me 102 times before I got this down, Naruto said, adopting a familiar taijutsu stance. How did you pick up that look? The older genin was thrown several yards away, but everyone could see the damage down to him. Neji screamed, overextending himself as Naruto ducked, only to strike points down his arm quickly. Neji howled in pain when he felt a blazing pain down his arm, but Naruto bowed backwards, planting both hands on the ground as he sent a mule kick into Neji's chest. There were twin black scorch marks where his jacket and undershirt had been burned off in the exact spot where Naruto had kicked him, but that wasn't the only damage. Someone pointed to Neji's exposed arm, the one he hadn't caught himself with, and pointed out that there was a red blister visible at every point along its length, from wrist to mid-bicep. I told you from Hinata, Neji. After 2 days of non-stop sparring, I was able to flawlessly mimic her Juken. That's only half of my style, though. Only my upper body, as you probably noticed, resembles the Juken, but my lower body. Naruto jumped and swung his leg out in a circle around him, leaving a trail of fire in his wake to illustrate his point. Neji forced himself to stand up and nursed his arms while he took out a container of salve to treat burns. Naruto called out, "Leaf Firestorm." He landed perfectly. As the blisters on his arm started to disappear, Neji hissed, "Lee's guy." Sensei's, Naruto seemed secure enough to allow Neji to continue fixing the harm he had done to his body. You're right, Goken. I began referring to it as the Flame Fist, but I didn't think that adequately described it. I decided to call it Dance of the Flickering Flames, or simply Flame Dance. Are you prepared to go on now? What are you doing, Oi? As Neji assumed his Juken stance once more, this time with a determined expression on his face, Naruto asked incredulously. You wish to continue? Does playing matches in general make you happy, or do you prefer to be served up extra? Crispy? Neji didn't respond as he charged at Naruto, who sighed and danced around his many, albeit accurate, attacks. Naruto asked as he also assumed his stance. However, Neji appeared to notice this and smirked as he came in from the side as Naruto ducked under the reckless swing, only to realize his error seconds too late as Neji used his new favorite jutsu. Despite this, Naruto was unable to get back at Neji. Kaden. He moaned as he pushed himself upwards as the swirling blue dome encircled him and tore into Naruto as he was flung back and skidded across the ground. As he stood up, Naruto hissed, what hit me? That felt like one of Gamasai's drunken punches. However, Neji attacked, seemingly taking advantage of his brief vulnerability and hammering the blonde with as many blows as he could muster. Though his body protested the movement, Naruto still managed to escape, groaning as he did so. Searching for a way to use this to his advantage, Naruto saw his target, racing at him, and ran through hand seals, pouring chakra into the jutsu, with just enough energy left to mutter, "Grand Fireball Jutsu." As he exhaled, a massive fireball preventing Neji from finishing him off. However, the cunning Hyuga slid across the ground, spinning on his knees, protected from the fire as he crashed into Naruto, battering the blonde's body as he became trapped between the wall and Neji's Kaden before finally falling to the ground. I told you that you were going to lose to me today, Uzumaki. Keep in mind that no amount of effort can alter your fate. Breathing heavily, Neji kicked Naruto's body sharply to make sure he was unconscious while attempting to stand up straight. Neji slowly turned as fast as his body would allow to face the person clapping for him, but as he did, his eyes widened and he collapsed to his knees. Very well done, Neji. I have to say, I'm impressed you managed to best him. I just beat you. How did you do that? Neji shouted, his voice tinged with fear, and in front of him stood an unharmed Naruto, who appeared almost arrogant at Neji's stunned expression. You didn't think I understood how your beloved eyes functioned, despite the fact that I told you I sparred with Hinata for 2 days. For example, I've been hiding in the little blind spot behind you the whole time you've been fighting, and I know about it. I'll admit that it was hard to remain hidden because you were always moving, but I made sure you were preoccupied enough to let me move." Naruto grinned at Neji's nearly inducing appearance. Naruto's clothing, which represented his previous strength to his current one, had changed from how his clone had looked, as if to indicate the transformed genin. The most striking change was in Naruto's face. His pants were jet black, but looser than typical shinobi attire, and they flowed smoothly into his combat boots. His tracksuit jacket had elongated in most directions, more like a trench coat now, though the once eyesore orange had been toned down to more of a reddish orange that, given the light breeze blowing, gave the impression of flames licking around Naruto. It was left open, allowing Neji to see his ninja mesh undershirt, which was contrasted by the black chain that hung around his neck and a small pendant that he could see with his eyes. 6 black lines, thin like fine calligraphy, stood out on his cheeks, and he wondered why they were there besides intimidating his opponents. His eyes now had the self-assured look of a leader, with 2 or 3 bangs hanging eye level and the rest of his wild mess contained by his headband. He pushed himself to stand up and made a final observation about Naruto. He had gained a few inches during the month-long break. It figures you would resort to some trick in order to survive. Neji grinned, assuming Naruto would lose his temper, but he would have known that Naruto didn't lose his temper easily if he had done the same thing as Naruto and read the reports that were in the public domain. Tricks? You mean you're not a shinobi and the rookie of the year, and you don't use tricks in combat? Neji snarled and charged at the obnoxious blonde. I don't mean to offend Panda or Lee, but your year must have been pretty crap, Naruto said, cocking his head like a bewildered animal. Neji's vision turned red as he jumped at the blonde, his blows coming like snake bites, but Naruto swerved smoothly around them before spinning on his heel, the backside of his coat brushing across Neji's face as he was momentarily blinded. Oh, and now he attacks straight on like a green genin. Naruto grinned merrily. This startled Neji awake, realizing that his Byakugan had shut off, most likely because he lacked chakra. Naruto had set one hand on the ground to brace himself before kicking outward, catching Neji under the chin as he was launched skyward, and he was unable to defend himself as a kunai struck him in the face, his life flashing before his eyes as the kunai sliced across his face. It took a few crucial moments for Neji to regain his bearings as he stood up, albeit drowsily, and glared at Naruto. He felt his cheek, feeling no blood, and he looked at Naruto with a superior gaze. He had closed his eyes in anticipation that it would hurt more, but all he felt was the hard ground crash into him, knocking out his breath and causing him to cough up blood. Naruto grinned knowingly as he hissed, if you can't hit a defenseless target, then maybe you shouldn't be a shinobi either. Naruto spun his finger, something glinting as the light caught it, and threw it to the ground in front of him so that Neji and the onlookers could see it. Oh, but I'm the dead last, and who said I was aiming for you? It was a headband. The Hyuga gave Naruto a smoldering glare, but Naruto didn't seem to notice, and Neji immediately covered his forehead, confirming his fears that he couldn't feel his headband and that Naruto was still wearing his. I'm not sure why you wore it at all. Naruto smirked and bowed to Neji, seemingly daring him to grab the dropped headband. You're definitely not a good Konoha shinobi, attacking teammates and family, and getting tricked so easily. It makes me wonder if maybe my teachings, or lack thereof, were better than yours. He had to get his headband back before he could use his secret weapon. It was no secret that he underestimated his opponents, but this time it had come back to haunt him. He reached into his pouch and took out a soldier pill and a blood pill to repair the damage to his body. He focused on the task at hand and vowed to defeat this failure. Perhaps I wouldn't have beaten her so easily if said family hadn't wasted every opportunity they gave her. Neji nearly grinned at Naruto's frown as he spat out, giving the pills time to take effect and feeling his reserves returning. Hinata-chan wasted every opportunity and wasn't even given a chance. Naruto snarled, his knuckles turning white as he resisted the impulse to jump on the Hyuga prodigy. Your elders ignored her from the moment they saw her. Did she tell you that? The whining of a pampered brat who is unable to accept her incapacity is all that those lies represent. Perhaps she wouldn't have needed to be replaced if she had focused more on training and less on complaining about her issues. When Neji reflects on that moment, he probably shouldn't have turned away from Naruto, but he hadn't anticipated the blonde to literally fire across the field and full body check Neji. You hear me, Hinata, you are, always have been, and always will be a failure, whose only saving grave is that you can be married. You awful work of filth. Are you going to stand here and defend them after all those WRICKED stains on society have done to you? Neji had the good fortune to bounce across the ground for a few more yards, extinguishing the flames, but the field was now neatly cut in half by the crevice. Naruto screamed, his hands blurring as he went through hand seals, inhaling as he breathed out, a stream of fire carving into the ground. "You're dead last, so don't bring up my father," Neji yelled from his side of the field. Naruto had left both on one side of the crevice due to the new landscaping, which was great for him because he could throw jutsu all day. However, Naruto had come to this match with the intention of showing Neji how to use taijutsu, so he picked up the abandoned headband and threw it across the field, sinking it into the wall next to Neji's head. If one were to judge, Naruto had the fastest reflexes in his year, if not in years. The Hyuga boy growled and withdrew it, tying it around his head as he charged at him, leaping at him as he came with a straight punch, something Naruto wasn't expecting because it went against his taijutsu style. Naruto leaned back and watched Neji land innocuously behind him, but this time he was taken by surprise when Neji rolled to absorb the blow and stood with his hands in the ram seal. Open. Gate of opening. The blonde was thrown into the air as Neji flipped over, leapt into, and caught the blonde in mid-air in a well known move. He called out before charging at Naruto, sliding beneath him as he struck with a straight palm thrust upwards into his bare back. Tenten was watching the game strategically from a few seats down, while Lee turned to his sensei in the stands to ask a question, but Guy was unresponsive. Lee first, then Neji. Did he and Guy sensei spend the break doing this? However, the stony-faced Junin would not respond to her questions. Neji smirked and used his leverage to flip on top of Naruto, charging up his palm as it glowed slightly, and slammed the Jukin palm into Naruto's gut, knocking out the blonde's breath as he was sent hurtling into the ground. "So, you finally broke down and explored outside your comfort zone. That's good. If I wasn't about to be slammed into the ground, I'd congratulate you." Naruto still had that annoying voice. Though a sudden gale enveloped him, Naruto was not entirely defenseless. He felt the wind rip at him, but his wounds healed just as quickly before he crashed into the ground below. His momentum slowed enough that his vision briefly swam, and then he swung outwards, tossing Neji away, who appeared bewildered. "What did you do?" The wind arrived just in time to help Naruto, who was now scrambling to his feet and shaking his head clear on a day that was completely clear and had very little wind. When Naruto smirked, he admitted, "Many people believe my power is the absolute control of fire, but that is a lie. We've all watched you manage those flames without using any hand seals, so tell us how you managed to do that without having complete control over fire," Neji demanded, but Naruto returned to his confident self and grinned knowingly at Neji, who snarled, "All right, you'd rather not tell me, I'll simply beat you to death." Neji's eyes glared ominously at Naruto as he hissed, "Second gate, gate of healing, open." But Neji righted himself in mid-air, sliding on the ground, bringing his glowing palm up to feel where his skin had blistered lightly from the contact. Neji cried out, his body flooding with chakra as he sped across the ground at Naruto, who smirked, grabbing his wrist as he struck, flipping the Hyuga in a judo throw, tossing him away, and hitting him in the chest with an open palm for good measure. "I think that's a point for me." Naruto smirked and repositioned himself as Neji charged the blonde, his hands a blur as he jabbed at Naruto, the Uzumaki doing his best to dodge, but his eyes couldn't keep up with the hand movements as Neji ducked beneath a straight palm strike, grinning viciously. Before Naruto could react, he sent a rapid flurry of jabs into Naruto's torso, causing pain to shoot through the boy's body as his chakra points were forcibly closed. To make matters worse, as Naruto leaned over to spit up some blood, Neji kneed him in the chin, sending him reeling back, before the Hyuga started to spin, his empowered cadence sending Naruto flying. "Failure, you are done." Neji turned away from the moaning blonde as the proctor jumped down to announce the match. "Just as I declared, you can't beat me, no matter how much you try to change yourself, you will always be a failure, and failures don't beat geniuses," Neji said. One of the two Chunin watching said, "Tisk, I thought he had the match in the bag." His partner laughed a little. But from the Hyuga's prodigy, what more could you ask for? He was not easily defeated, and when the chips were down, the blonde did have a way of sparing him. Many great shinobi have fallen victim to arrogance, and it appears that it has a new victim, the other one replied. Genma yelled, "The winner," but was met with sardonic laughter. The stadium watched as Naruto pushed himself to his feet, stumbling a little. "Do you talk like this all the time? I have news for you," Naruto said, his face bursting into a broad smile. "If you're intricate, fail. Proof plan was to nag me into submission, to break my spirits with idle chatter, then I have news for you." He then clapped his hands once, the sound reverberating throughout the stadium as he took a step forward, embers sprouting to life around him. "I'll leave you smoldering unless you turn up the heat," he growled, his joy gone as he shifted into a serious expression. "Why do you keep returning to criticize me? Give up already, you're like a weed." Neji retreated in disbelief after saying, "You can't defeat me in straight taijutsu, and you have no chakra now. How about if I escalate this battle?" Naruto gave a small smile. "You appear ready to pass out right now, and I can plainly see that you have no more chakra points in your torso. Do you not hear me? I've seen the future, and it's time for you to give up." Naruto laughed as Neji approached him slowly. "What's so funny, as I doubt you're laughing at your own pitifulness?" Neji asked. "What's so funny, you ask? Foolish Neji, I'll tell you. You say your eyes can see into the future, but I can blind myself and do the same." With his finger rising to flick his headband down and conceal his electric blue eyes, Naruto exclaimed. "Why you? Your impudence will cost you dearly." When Neji approached Naruto, he ducked out of the way and head-butted him in the stomach, knocking out his breath. Neji stumbled backwards, trying to get air back into his lungs. Neji spat out an acrid spit, sending an open palm strike at Naruto, who didn't seem to notice. "How did you?" he muttered, then gritted his teeth and launched a flurry of jabs at Naruto, who skillfully dodged the blows and struck back every few seconds, causing tiny blisters to form on Neji's skin. "Swerve around this. I'm not sure how you're doing it. 64 palms in 8 trigrams." He let out a cry and launched an attack, but Naruto effortlessly sidestepped them and knocked his blows away like he was merely batting flies. "How are you able to do this?" As Naruto returned to his initial stance, Neji exhaled deeply, the chakra that had been hovering around him dissipating. Neji lifted his headband and noticed that Naruto's eyes had not changed. Nothing about the blonde had changed. "A true shinobi never discloses his secrets," Naruto replied, looking straight at Neji, who snarled and attempted to hit him before Naruto's quick, unexpected kick sent him flying back. Neji dutifully observed that this time there were no burn marks on him. "Speak my name now," Naruto commanded. "Tell them who beat you, who's the failure now." Neji snarled and spat out the name in a hateful manner, "Failure." Naruto took the Hyuga by the neck and raised him into the air. Neji spat at Naruto, who hissed, "I said, say, my name. The dead last failure is you." As his air started to run out, Neji struggled to say each word as he growled. "Say my name one last time." Neji felt the increasing heat on his neck as Naruto growled out, his hand growing hotter. He said, "Uzumaki, Naruto." Naruto let him go as he was out of breath. "I am Naruto, and I am Uzumaki. I will no longer be this village's toy, nor will the will of the wimp." This would cause problems, he shouted to the sky, causing Sarutobi's eyes to widen at his declaration. "Failure, you shouldn't leave your back open." Time seemed to slow down for the two of them as Neji snarled out and rose, using all of his remaining chakra to launch a final blow at Naruto's back, aiming for the blonde's heart. However, in a red flash, Naruto spun around, sending his attack wide as he growled out, a glowing ball appearing in his opposite hand as he spun on his heel. "You need to be knocked down a few pegs, but I didn't want to use this. You are aware of what occurs when gas is compressed this tightly and ignited. Then, combustion 101, tick, tick, boom. Blistering bomb." The tightly compressed ball of gas exploded outwards as it touched Neji's chest, sending him skyward while fire burst forth. Neji slouched to the ground after colliding with the outer wall, only to have something block out the sun above him. He barely opened his eyes long enough to see Naruto standing over him, holding something. "You know, over the past few days, Hinata has taught me something fascinating. It turns out that you would lose your priceless eyes and gradually go insane from the nerve ending pain if you were to get the blood of a main family member on that seal." In order to save himself, Neji questioned why the proctor hadn't called the match yet when Naruto revealed, "I got this vial of blood from Hinata intending to use it on you after the match. However, Hinata pleaded with me not to. She pleaded with me to refrain from hurting her Neji.ni.san despite everything you've done, including the insults, pain, and suffering. How does it make you feel to know that the alleged failure saved your life?" Neji was left stunned as the realization struck him, and Naruto asked as he turned to leave after dropping the vial of blood on the ground. The glass instantly broke as the blood smeared the ground and seeped into the dirt. When Genma noticed that Neji was not rising, she yelled, "Winner, Naruto Uzumaki." There was a brief period of silence before thunderous applause broke out from the audience. The crowd erupted in roars of approval, and the vibration alone made Naruto tense. Oddly, or not surprisingly, he was angry at the huddled masses' display of approval. These were the same people who tormented his life when he was helpless, and now that they pretended nothing had ever happened, it made him realize how hopeless the civilians were. In the area designated for Junin, senseis and teammates, he noticed Lee's startled expression. He grinned and gave the bowl-haired taijutsu expert a thumbs up, and she appeared to recover from his surprise and return the gesture. Naruto nodded and turned to find his target, spotting her off to the side, clinging to the iron railing of the small box designated for competitors. Tensing his legs, he leapt to her side, grasping the edge as he appeared directly in front of her, startling the wary Hyuga. "Eep," she said, taking a step back as Naruto smirked, went into the box, and dusted himself off. With that done, he admired Hinata's new attire, blushing as she shyly averted her gaze. Her jacket was gone, replaced by a darker blazer style jacket that exposed her forearms and went slightly past her elbows. She wore a pale lavender shirt underneath her blazer jacket, revealing her growing bosom that hung down to her hips where her pouch hung, and a dark blue skirt that ended at her knees, concealing her smooth legs with boots that reached mid-calf, preventing the Hyuga from receiving any more male stares. Not that she didn't like it when Naruto looked at her that way. Her outfit was finished with a small white ribbon tied in the back of her hair, indicating the beginning of her ponytail. She had discovered that Naruto liked her long hair, so she had tried to let it grow out. He muttered the final line, "Hey, Hina-chan, you look beautiful." Hinata blushed angrily at his praise. She muttered back, "Thanks." They both turned slightly away, trying to conceal their own blushes. "Hey, Hina, after this you." Genma interrupted Naruto's question to announce the start of the next match. The blonde Suna.Nin gave her youngest sibling a nervous look as Genma stated, "Next match, Gaara no Suna versus Tamari no Suna, if both combatants will join me on the field." You could still feel the tension rising in the stadium as Genma nodded and immediately moved on to the next pairing. Tamari declared, "I forfeit, I can't fight my little brother." The crowd moaned as the possibility of another epic fight was cut short. "All right, then, could you please bring down the next fighters? Sakura Haruno and Dosu." Sakura nodded to Naruto and leapt to the ground a few feet below, but it was ultimately unnecessary because Dosu had yet to appear and was compelled to forfeit, even though Naruto had a sneaking suspicion that something was amiss because Gaara had smiled slyly when the sound.nin was brought up. The crowds around them started to get restless and wanted to see more fighting. The first match had made them anxious, and they were left without any follow-up, which was not cool. "All right, then, we'll move on to the next game unless we have any objections," Genma said. "Kankuro no Suna against Sasuke Uchiha." Naruto laughed ominously since Sasuke had yet to appear, and it would be fitting if Kakashi's constant tardiness led to his elimination. The final Uchiha, however, showed up at the last minute, glaring at Kakashi, who was scratching the back of his head in an auspicious manner, while still managing to look guilty. Genma gave Sasuke a brief explanation of the rules, to which he replied with his typical sour, "HNN." Genma then leapt back, announcing the beginning of the fourth match in the first round of the finals. They hit a small bush behind him that started to wither seconds later. Sasuke started by throwing multiple shuriken at Kankuro, who just twitched his fingers. Crow, his puppet, opened its mouth and fired off a small hail of senbon that deflected the metal stars, forcing Sasuke to dodge to the side to avoid being hit by the senbon that got through his attack. As he was slowly pinned in, senbon strewn all over the ground and wall around him, preventing him from running. Sasuke muttered, "Poison," just like Kakashi thought. But once the match started, he had activated his Sharingan, had the swirling red eyes fixed on the Suna puppeteer, saw his other hand twitch, and kept a close eye on any changes with the strange puppet. His training paid off as he quickly substituted with a log, escaping the trap as Kankuro frowned. Now the Uchiha would be on the lookout for both of his puppets. He brought a third, but it was purely defensive, and he didn't have the training to manage the three puppets simultaneously, not to mention he didn't like showing all his cards. However, he had tunnel vision with his eyes trained on Crow, and it nearly cost him as a second puppet erupted from the ground, its chest cavity like a gaping maw as he began to fall in. In an attempt to lure the genin into attacking him, he yelled, "I almost had you there, Uchiha. Are you able to hear yourself? As if I would fall for such a small trick, I am a Uchiha." As Kankuro felt his anger building, Sasuke growled out, his eyes half-lidded, "You should forfeit now, and save yourself the embarrassment of embarrassing your village." Crow's mouth opened again and sent out a huge hail of senbon, to which Sasuke HN'd as he swung his arms in an X motion. "Is there nothing more important to you than dismissing senbon? How pitiful, I don't know how you got this far." Sasuke spoke in a superior voice, his hands gliding through fast seals before he exhaled a huge fireball that burned the senbon and continued to blast through Crow, forcing Kankuro to sidestep. He rolled over to look at the field, but Sasuke was standing over him with a kunai at his throat. Kankuro sighed and raised his hands in forfeiture, saying, "I give up." Instead of grinning in triumph, Sasuke continued to stare him down, even after the proctor halted the match. In keeping with his stoic persona, Sasuke said nothing to his two teammates, who mirrored him as they watched the match. Winner: Sasuke Uchiha. Instead, Sasuke stood, nodded to Kakashi, and moved to the competitor's box. Gaara was watching Sasuke with glee in his eyes as the voice in his head demanded his blood. Will the next two contestants then make their way to the field? The crowd fell silent as Genma yelled, "Shikamaru Nara and Shino Aburame." The two boys' teammates also fell silent, realizing that this would be a battle of strategy rather than skill. Genma jumped back, cautious to avoid the senbon that was still strewn all over the field, and said, "Hajime." As expected, both boys stood motionless, watching their opponent, though Shikamaru just yawned and Shino's surveying gaze was obscured by his sunglasses. "This whole situation is too bothersome for me, so if I could have my druthers, I would just forfeit right away. But if I didn't at least try, my mother threatened to assign me housework. So, I'll try not to exert myself too much," Shikamaru admitted, yawning again. The only indication that he had heard the Nara's words was a slight lift of his eyebrows, and as if in response, he held out his arms, sending tiny insects flying as Shikamaru watched them approach with alert eyes. Shikamaru leapt back, but the bugs stopped abruptly as if they had struck a shield. Shikamaru nodded as though he suspected this, and he looked around for something that would help him win the battle. The bugs slowly retreated back to Shino, disappearing within the folds of his jacket sleeves as the Nara noted, "Your bugs can only go so far away from their host, just like our shadow possession jutsu." Shino showed no signs of being heard. Shikamaru created a seal while crouching and muttered under his breath, "Shadow possession jutsu." As his shadow reached out to Shino, who ducked back out of its line of sight, Shikamaru showed no signs of surprise, but he did experience a slight tingling sensation as his eyes searched for the source, eventually locating it close to Shino and determining that some of his bugs had become entangled in the jutsu. He quickly drew it back to himself, aware that he had to be careful not to exert himself too much. He said, sitting on the balls of his feet while his hands transformed into a new seal and the Nara closed his eyes to try to come up with a strategy. "And I can't use my jutsu, can't restrain all those bugs for prolonged amounts of time." Shikamaru, recalling the preliminaries, quickly used his jutsu to check for any resistance, but he found none, so he looked at the Aburame, who calmly watched his opponent, waiting outside the distance his shadow could reach. Shika had to jump back to avoid being hit by Shino, who had charged the boy, sensing that he was distracted. Shika found safety in the shadows of the walls, and he stepped back, his shoe catching on something. He looked down, risking an attack, and saw one of the senbon that had been discarded by the previous match. Suddenly, a plan came to him, and he quickly grabbed senbon from the ground, being careful not to touch the poisoned ends, and threw them at Shino, who jumped back as they sank into the ground. Shikamaru managed to throw a few more before Shino's bugs stopped the senbon, dropping them to the side without harm. Slowly but surely, more senbon started to join the others in the ground. Shikamaru smirked and sank to his feet, gathering chakra for one last jutsu. He slipped one last senbon into his hand and threw it, rapidly forming the seals for his family's signature jutsu. Shino looked stealthily at the senbon approaching him, but he saw the approaching shadow because he knew his bugs would block it. Before Shino knew it, he was encircled by shadows on all sides, with only his bugs holding the shadows at bay as Shikamaru was unable to hold many more creatures in place. He jumped back, but the shadow reached the first senbon throne and began again as it added more shadows to its network, pinging between the senbons stuck in the ground. Shino could still see the signs of exertion on the boy's face as he struggled to hold back the slowly expanding horde of bugs. Though they may appear small and frail, Shino knew that, in addition to the fact that thousands of bugs were battling Shikamaru, they could move objects several times their own body weight, so he could wait him out until he felt a sharp pain in his arms and noticed that his limbs had gone limp, with a senbon protruding. Shikamaru must have been shocked because he laughed while perspiring. "I knew I couldn't fight that many bugs and I knew you would use that to your advantage," Shikamaru said. "However, you must compartmentalize while managing your bugs while you have all of those bugs out. As you likely noticed, I used my shadow possession jutsu after throwing those final senbon moments." As Shino fell to one knee, Shikamaru revealed, breathing heavily as he attempted to maintain his jutsu, "But instead of blocking the senbon like you thought, I took control of them for a second, just long enough for the senbon to slip through their guard. After that, it's just a matter of waiting. Which will surrender first, your jutsu or my body?" Reaching for his waist, Shino drew out a kunai and threw it at Shikamaru, hoping to cause the Nara to move and stop his jutsu. But the kunai widened, missing Shikamaru, and Shino's vision swam, seeing double as he grabbed his head, forcing his vision to realign. His ears rang as he heard someone say, "I forfeit, I don't have the chakra to continue. Winner, Shino Aburame." He felt the last of his strength fading as he fell forwards, but he couldn't bring himself to look up, only to be caught by someone. He blinked to see it was Shikamaru, who got an arm under him and helped him back to the competitor's box. His vision turned black as he fainted, noting that the faint ringing in his ears was likely the roaring of the crowd above. "Hey, Kankuro. Give me the remedy for your poison," Shikamaru said in a tone that was harsh for the typically laid-back boy. "Why ought I to?" Naruto turned to glare at the Suna.nin as the puppet. Using boy continued, his arms folded across his chest. "There's no need, anyways, and I'm not going to just give over the antidote to my poison that easily." "Doll boy. What's that supposed to mean?" Hinata was startled by Naruto's piercing tone as he let out a growl. "Father forbade me from using my stronger poisons for the finals, so he'll survive." He returned Naruto's glare evenly and added, "And antidotes are a closely guarded secret among puppeteers." "All right, you have the prerogative to refuse to assist." The Aburame moaned as Naruto walked over to check on Shino and said, "But don't look to us for help when you need it." As Hinata turned to face Shino, Naruto leaned over to touch her hand and said, "Hey Hinata. Give her hell, and don't worry, he'll be fine." She nodded and moved aside, descending the stairs to the floor. Narissa Suin vs Hinata Hyuga, Hajime, final first round match, Genma yelled, jumping back as the two girls caught their weapons in their hands with a flick of their wrists and looked around for any tricks. Narissa's was a medium-length scythe, the blade shining in the light, and Hinata's was her whip, the tip now a barbed mess of crystal as she let it hang limply at her side. Narissa called out, "Hey, Blue," with Hinata displaying annoyance at the name. "Don't worry, I don't hold it against you," Narissa said about Amy. "To be honest, I probably would have if you hadn't. She was continuously disparaging my sister and me. I can put up with someone making fun of me, but when you start on my sister, well," she trailed off, and Hinata nodded and smiled slightly. "Yes, I have a younger sister, and despite the fact that we argue frequently, I would most likely kill someone if they harmed her. How about we get into a fight to avoid disappointing our sisters?" With her fist clenched and unclenched around the handle of her whip, Hinata questioned. Narissa jumped at Hinata and swung her scythe like a reaper, saying, "Sounds good to me, Blue." The twin blocked with the blade of her scythe, swiftly spinning the weapon around to hit Hinata with the pole as she was knocked back, holding her gut where it had hit her. Hinata leapt over the first swing, bent backwards under the second, and spun around the third, a downward swing as she went with the momentum. Narissa said calmly, "I think that's first blood." Hinata gave her a little, "huh," and she was taken aback when the whip appeared behind her, sideswiping her cheek as she flinched, a tiny trickle of blood dripping from the blow. Hinata taunted, pulling her whip taut as Narissa swung in from the side, the trained leather holding back the gleaming blade as Hinata wrapped her whip around the hilt, holding her in place as she struck her repeatedly in the chest with her taijutsu. Narissa growled, nearly tripping back, but her weapon was still firmly in Hinata's grasp. "No, that's first blood, you just hit me with a stick." Narissa used the scythe handle as an anchor and leapt up, snapping Hinata in the chest and letting go as she rolled back, the blade of the scythe sinking into the dirt beside her head. Narissa rolled sideways and got hold of the handle as she spun in midair, almost chopping off half of Hinata's arm if the Hyuga hadn't rolled out of the way. As Narissa gazed at her indifferently, Hinata stood up, flowing like water, and the two girls paused for a few seconds before fighting once more. As the twins stumbled back, Hinata struck again, her whip going limp as it released Narissa's scythe, only for the Hyuga to whip it around and send it tip first into Narissa's stomach, the barbs tearing out pieces of flesh as blood began to leak from her wound. Hinata grinned slightly as she pulled on the weapon, but instead of Narissa approaching, Hinata flew at her, her juken palms sinking into the twins' soft stomach flesh, knocking out her breath with the sensation that her insides were about to explode. The twin glared at her as she swung out her scythe, wincing as the motion aggravated her wounds. "Mujutsu. Tethered drill," she said. The brunette leapt at Hinata and swung wildly at her, with Hinata leaning around the attacks. It's true that the quick, precise slashes would have overwhelmed Hinata if she hadn't been trained to make small adjustments to avoid juken strikes. In an attempt to gain some distance before her next move, Hinata leapt back, but the twin wasn't satisfied with that, and she swung the scythe into the ground, launching herself at her opponent with a kick that sent her flying back and striking a crater left by a previous match. Leaping down to her level, Narissa swung her scythe, and Hinata narrowly avoided it as it sliced through the air. Backflipping, Hinata struck out with her whip, and Narissa deflected the attack with the flat of her blade, her free hand grabbing the whip just behind the tip, yanking Hinata back to her as she jabbed her with the end of her scythe, knocking her breath out. Hinata wiped her mouth clean of blood and glared at the twin who was staring at her smugly. She said, "You fought a good fight, but this is it, blue." Hinata snarled and pushed herself to her feet while glancing at the ground. Before Narissa could question her, she began to spin, saying, "I haven't got to test this move yet, so let me know what you think." Sakura was back in the competitor's box, watching the match closely next to Naruto, who was grinning subtly at his crush. "That reminds me of Neji's Kaden," Sakura said. Sakura said, "But I thought Hinata couldn't do it," and Naruto muttered a laugh. Sakura gave him a questioning look as Naruto remarked, "No, that's Hinata in her element, nothing like Neji." 8 trigrams, Mujutsu. Tethered storm wheel. As Narissa attempted to repel the numerous attacks, Hinata yelled, her whip swishing through the air, only to have her weapon knock away and clatter to the ground. Narissa's eyes were wide as she saw the damage caused by Hinata's attack. It was as if a tornado had landed around her, slicing pieces of the earth out in a perfect circle, but her whip was still cutting the air in a perfect dome as she spun on the balls of her field. She was suddenly pulled sharply as the whip gripped her wrist, and Hinata threw her across the arena, her sides sinking into the wall next to her. Eventually, she slowed down, blinking her eyes multiple times as she fought off the dizziness. "You definitely don't go down easily, wow," Narissa said. "I guess I'll have to really try now, or I'm going to lose." With a quick flick of her wrist, she was holding a second, identical side, but she still twisted the blank ends as they joined, giving her a dual-ended scythe that she spun between her palms. As she approached Hinata, she swung at her midsection, and Hinata replaced it with a neatly cut log. Narissa, glaring at her, yelled, "You want to dance, because I don't think you can keep up with me." As she jumped at Hinata, she yelled, "Blade dance." Her scythe spun like a silver disc, and she used it like a saw blade to cut into Hinata, who was trying to dodge her many attacks, some of which succeeded, but only caused tiny cuts that stung with every movement even though they weren't leaking blood. The scythe in front of her had turned a sickening shade of green save for a few tiny spots that glowed orange, and her eyes had suddenly brightened, the entire world turning to shades of gray before a barrage of colors assaulted her vision, varying shades of red, yellow, and green. Although she was perplexed by the change in her eyes, she was compelled to consider it later when the scythe sliced deeply into her arm, leaving a red gash, as she blinked and her vision returned to normal. With her arms feeling like jelly and the strain of maintaining her best jutsu wearing her down, Narissa paused and took a deep breath, pushing the weakness to the back of her mind. Kami forbid she lose now, after coming this far. Though they were only 5 months old at the time and couldn't recall it, she and her sister had heard how others had spoken of them and wanted to honor the memory of their parents who, despite being civilians, had given their lives to save people trapped in a burning building during the Kyuubi attack by becoming kunoichi. What they didn't anticipate was that the majority of shinobi were so conceited that it made the twins ill. The Uchihas, Hyugas, and practically every clan were conceited about civilian-born people. However, she would now demonstrate to them that a civilian-born person could be treated with the same respect as a clan-born person. Looking back at Hinata, she raised her scythe, her arms full of new strength as she charged the Hyuga, and she could see her sister's smile from here, as though she were standing beside her, encouraging her. This time, however, Hinata was prepared, her whip snaking out to grab Narissa's ankle, yanking her off her feet as she was flung away, but she allowed her body to go limp, swinging her arm out as she threw her scythe, taking Hinata by surprise as the blow struck her head, stars dancing across her vision. Narissa, meanwhile, went limp, her body landed on her feet as she skidded back, and then sprang forward at Hinata, who was shaking the stars out of her eyes. The twin arrived at her dropped scythe just as Hinata's vision returned to normal. She barely managed to raise her whip in time to catch the scythe's descending blade, but Narissa only used it as a means of support as she flipped Hinata over and kicked her in the shoulder, sending her to one knee. Narissa jumped on the blue net, taking advantage of her apparent vulnerability, and choked Hinata out as she gasped for air with the staff part. "Where's her prestige now, Hyuga?" The girl spat out, and Hinata's eyes darkened a little as she twisted, her head whipping forwards as her foot came up to strike the brunette in the back of her head. Head-butting the stunned brunette, who fell backwards with both sides of her head resonating from the hits, Hinata leveraged herself up as her vision swam and Narissa's grip weakened on the dual-ended scythes. Hinata jumped to her feet, her whip ready should Narissa stand, and she did, using the scythe as a prop to hold herself up while her eyes tried to focus. Even though her head hung as she attempted to make her body react, she hissed, "No, I refuse to fall to a clan born." She felt the red-hot pain of Hinata's whip striking her arms and legs, with welts rising to show where she was hit as she nearly fell. The civilian-born fell to the ground in a heap as Hinata swung her whip out, the end wrapping around Narissa's ankle as she pulled. Hinata began to strike her again, but paused at her anguished expression. Narissa was able to regain control of her body and growl at the sympathetic Hyuga, slashing at her as she bent backwards, the gleaming blade slicing through nothing. The girl tried to get back up after her scythe fell silently to the ground. She was empowered by the images of her parents' disgruntled faces as she spat out, as if, I would lose to a weak clan born. Since I lost both of my parents before I even knew them, you have no idea what true strength is like. How can you stand there and act so superior to me? Despite Hinata's refusal to comply with this haughty kunoichi, Narissa pushed herself up and glared at her, but she turned away as her wrist snapped and the barbed tip of her whip struck her ear as she fell to the ground, screaming in agony as she felt the track marks across her cheek where the tip had cut into her flesh. Hinata coiled her whip and hung it on a clip next to her pouch, saying, there is no dishonor in losing, nor in fighting an impossible battle for the right reasons, only in failing to protect that which we call precious. The crowd had gone silent as they waited to see what the civilian born would do as she dropped her scythe, the metal hitting the ground soundlessly as she called out just loud enough, I concede. She began to fall to her knees, silently pleading with her parents' spirits for forgiveness, but she glanced to the side and saw Farissa's teary gaze as she looked away. Narissa rose slowly, her body protesting as she nearly fell, but she managed to catch herself on her side, which she had managed to lift despite her exhaustion. But then, something unexpected happened. Hinata caught the limp girl and held her hand up high as though she had won, even though Narissa knew that wasn't the case. She looked bewilderedly at the Hyuga and saw her opalescent eyes looking at her tenderly and compassionately. As Hinata supported the brunette and assisted her to the side door leading to the infirmaries, she heard the Genma say, that concludes the first round of the Chunin finals. We will have a 10 minutes break to give you time to take care of any business, and so our fighters can recuperate. Hinata confided, stand tall, the child of a hero does not bow to her enemy, no matter the circumstances. As the medic.nin assisted Narissa into a bed, Hinata thought, good, that gives me time to do this and get back to watch Naruto Kun's fight. She also noticed Neji nearby, her father holding a scroll and a line of tears running down his cheek as he spoke softly to him. In retrospect, Farissa had joined her sister in the infirmary, swooning over her injured sister. Hinata moved forward, about to say something when Farissa yelled for her to leave, but Narissa's hand on her arm cut her off. As both twins gazed expectantly at the brunette, Narissa exclaimed, wait, let's see what she has come to say, and then you can get back to treating me like a porcelain doll. Farissa blushed slightly. Hinata closed the curtains, which had a privacy seal on them, and said, we have something to discuss. Leaning back, Hiruzen felt his chakra slowly and steadily draining, but he didn't panic. It was to be expected. He gazed down at the arena calculatingly, inwardly proud of the next generation of shinobi and kunoichi if these fights were any indication. In addition to being a master of battle seals, the fourth had also altered the arena by adding a huge repair seal that, once activated, would return it to its initial state, as the third had done at the end of the round. In addition, a version of the summoning seal surrounded the arena ground, allowing fighters inside to throw jutsu and other weapons without endangering onlookers. Naturally, maintaining both seals required a great deal of chakra, which is why more than 50 Junin had been linked in along with the third, the two seals drawing chakra from everything and any jutsu that struck the outer wall. The next match, however, was what the seasoned Hokage was most concerned about. He knew what Gaara was and did not approve of the Kazekage sending his son in, knowing full well that the Jinchuriki might lose control during the matches. He was up against Naruto, whose Biju would undoubtedly react to the Shukaku inside Gaara, and it was sure to be an earth-shattering battle. Hinata moved to stand next to Naruto as he walked silently back into the competitor's box, her hand twitching as it lightly rubbed against Naruto's. He held her hand without looking, but if one did, they would see that his face was flushed. She let out a satisfied sigh as her thoughts turned back to the discussion she had just had with the twins. Naruto whispered, so, how'd they take it? And Hinata squeezed his hand in response. He said quietly, I'm sorry. At the next match, Genma declared, the first match of the second round is about to begin. Will the next two combatants, Naruto Uzumaki and Gaara no Suna, please come down to the field? The crowd was chatting excitedly. Despite the bloodthirsty grin on his face, Gaara simply appeared with his arms crossed in a flurry of sand, looking like the epitome of nonchalance. Genma cast a wary glance at the sand, wielding Genin, hoping to initiate the fight so he could leave the immediate vicinity. As he made his way to the stairs, Naruto let go of Hinata's hand, but she grabbed it as they both turned red. The fact that the two were being observed by the other fighters, with the exception of Shino, who was still unconscious. Hinata began, be safe Naruto-kun. Aye. But Naruto's gentle smile at his girlfriend interrupted her with her famous stutter. Naruto's typically sunny smile returned as he said, me too, Hina. Chan. Don't worry, I've got a plan, and it'll take more than Sandy to beat me. Besides, it took me this long to get you. You ain't getting rid of me that easily. He leaned down and kissed Hinata's forehead before he had time to think about what he was doing. The young couple's current heated argument was mercifully ended when Sakura stepped in next to Naruto and shoved him in the direction of the stairs. As the pinkette gazed longingly at Sasuke, who scowled and dismissed her glances, she called after him, hardly moving Hinata. Gone on Goldie. Bashfulness doesn't suit you. Why did I choose the one that likes to play hard.to.get? Sakura sighed, asking in a dejected and rhetorical manner. As Naruto approached Gaara and Genma on the field, they exhaled in relief and he retreated, ready to jump away. Despite the hostility, or rather because of it, both Jinchurikis turned to stare at Genma as if he were insane. Genma said, "Okay now, I want a good clean fight, no cheap shots below the belt, and the face is off limits. Disregard that." "Hajime!" exclaimed Genma as he leapt to the safety of his small alcove and watched the battle, breathing with relief that he had not been maimed. Any thoughts of such things were erased by the kunai that embedded itself in the wall beside him. The crowd had anticipated that either shinobi would immediately jump into action now that the match had started. Tragically, they were let down when Naruto reached down to his waist and opened a box, taking out a cylinder of paper and putting it in his mouth. Beside his sensei Kurenai, high above the arena floor, Kiba remarked, "I didn't know that Naruto smoked." He was a little disappointed that he was the only member of his team not to advance to the finals, but he put the emotion on hold because Naruto was his opponent. Kurenai looked sideways at Asuma, who was, you guessed it, smoking a cigarette, and replied, "I didn't either." Upon noticing, the Sarutobi released a tiny puff of smoke. Desperately, he replied, "Yes, a genin is smoking, so it must be my fault for looking so cool while doing it. Come on, the kid isn't even on my squad. If it was Shikamaru, or even Choji, then you might be able to blame me," he replied. Asuma turned the female glare in his direction and said, "Personally, I blame Kakashi for it." Kakashi replied calmly, "Don't blame me, if he got a filthy habit from me, he would have a book out right now." Junin didn't even look up from his book. With the whole box of Junin, sensei and teammates staring at the silver-haired Junin, who started to perspire, Kiba remarked, "He does." He started to cry in his head over his impending actions as he felt the pressure mounting and resorted to his last option. At the top of his lungs, he exclaimed, "Come on Naruto. Let your flames of passion burn brightly." The box fell silent, and everyone's eyes were fixed on the wide-eyed Guy and Lee. Suddenly, the two gripped each other tightly, blinding everyone around them as Kakashi successfully dragged Shushin to safety. Taking a deep breath, Naruto sent a giant ball of flame through hand seals at Gaara. Gaara swatted the attack away with his sand without hesitation, and he returned the favor by sending a small tendril at Naruto to try to catch the blonde, who sidestepped with the aid of a shadow clone that took the attack in his place. Gaara gave no indication that the taunt had been heard, so Naruto hissed smugly, "Well, I believe that counts as our opening moves. How about you actually try, Ichi?" The sand then leapt out over his head and started to descend like a scorpion's tail, making a fruitless attempt to strike Naruto, who dodged the blows, but they only held him back and prevented him from pausing lest he was trapped and crushed. The blonde landed on top of a big stone that protruded from the ground after backflipping away. He barely had time to inhale and exhale before he dove sideways as one of the sand strikes struck the stone, turning it into rubble almost immediately. Gaara glared at Naruto in silence as he used a single seal to create up to 30 clones, each of whom charged at the red-haired Suna.nin from a different direction. Just as the shadow clones were about to dogpile on him, the Jinchuriki remembered the sand in a matter of seconds and ran through a brief series of hand seals. He finished with a loud growl as sand exploded out of the middle of the pile, instantly dispelling almost all of the clones. The ones that miraculously survived the outburst were then swiftly captured and crushed as a giant dome of sand surrounded Gaara. It seemed, however, that the Jinchuriki had not lagged behind during the month-long training. A tiny sand construction hovered nearly a foot above it, and Naruto recognized it as an eye before more sand started to form around it. As more sand piled on, a tiny tendril rose from the dome to connect. The cage. Disguised Orochimaru leapt to his feet in the cage's box above, his hand twitching as he began to signal the beginning of the invasion, only to have his former sensei put a friendly hand on his arm. Without even the slightest hint of alarm that a Jinchuriki was letting loose his Biju in the middle of their village, he calmly said, "Do not worry, Cage, things are under control." This is what Orochimaru told him. As he crossed his arms, happy to watch the match, Hiruzen said evenly, "Oh, you know how our fourth Hokage was regarded for his seals, and if you don't, just ask any Iwa.nin, He also retrofitted our arena before he passed away. The boy's Biju can't escape the seal until it runs out of chakra or I use the seal to release it. With a muttered curse, Orochimaru took a seat again to wait for the opportunity to launch the invasion. As he watched the battle unfold below, the Cascade shot back, "Really, with this in your village? One has to wonder how the Kyuubi caused such trouble for you. Forgive me, I did not mean to offend." As he watched Naruto avoid a particularly nasty sand spike, Sarutobi retorted, "It's okay, after all, we are allies, and I'm not one to be so easily insulted. But you would be right. You personally know the power of the Biju. This seal couldn't hold one using more than 4 taels worth of power, but if my memory serves, you only sent the Ichibi." In an attempt to salvage his scheme, Orochimaru questioned, "But you also mentioned that the seal could run out of chakra. Wouldn't this seal have to have a source somewhere? You're looking at it. Any chakra-based attacks that hit the sides are drawn into the seal's reserves fueling. While it could theoretically run out of chakra, thereby releasing the Biju, that theory is totally dependent on the Biju sitting still long enough for it to happen. Are you telling me that Suna has a totally domesticated Biju?" The Hokage chuckled. Orochimaru growled at being outwitted by a dead Hokage, resisting the urge to hiss and stick his tongue out. In particular, the one who assumed his proper position. As the blonde rolled to the side, Naruto pulled out a kunai, dug it into Gaara's calf, and applied as much pressure as he could to break through the sand armor that Gaara had worn during the preliminaries. Naruto watched as the sand finished heaping upon the eye, now a fully constructed Gaara, as it hopped off and ran at Naruto full tilt. The sand Gaara looked at him angrily as it tried to stomp on his head right away, but Naruto barrel rolled to the side, avoiding the crushing blow as sand Gaara pursued. However, his kunai went straight through the leg, leaving a sandy wound where the wound should have been. When Sand Gaara swung out at Naruto, he was able to flip himself to his feet and dodged well. His hand flew at him, sending a tiny spray of sand behind it. Naruto ducked under it, sending his leg through the connection as the hand dissolved in a small pile of sand. It looked at its hand before it reformed, and the sand clone appeared unfazed. Naruto was able to see behind the clone as it was being tested with a test grip. A thin line of sand connected the clone's neck to the sand dome in the middle of the field. The sand clone charged at Naruto once more before he could see anything else. As the sand clone seemed immobile while healing from any damage, Naruto rolled sideways and hurled multiple kunai at it in an attempt to divert its attention. But instead, the kunai simply sank into the clone's body before the sand clone lifted his arm and retaliated with a crumpled iron chunk. Naruto scowled as he leapt over the assault, but the sand clone suddenly materialized and grabbed his ankle. Quickly reacting, Naruto kicked the sand clone hard in the face, causing it to scatter and freeze as it reassembled itself. It was still holding Naruto's ankle, which he hadn't anticipated, as he fell upside down and slammed his head against the ground. He bit back and let out a cry of agony as his head rang, but instead of trying to crush him, the clone slung him to the side and into the stone wall as it completed rebuilding. In his peripheral vision, he witnessed the clone throw its arm out as the ground was covered in sand. The clone then sped across the sand like a skater on ice, kicking Naruto as it rose before a sandy hand around his neck pinned him to the wall. Just as the clone dispelled, Gaara's clone was staring at the smoke in confusion as Naruto used one of his patented escape strategies, a smokeless Kawarimi with a shadow clone, that he had created when the sand clone was rebuilding its face. As he pushed himself to his feet, Naruto executed his plan by throwing 2 kunai at the sand clone, which sank into it just as the first 3 did, though the clone remained motionless. But after they had taken hold, Naruto yelled a sharp, "Crush this," while holding a one-handed seal. 2 explosive tags protruded from the sand clone's chest when it looked down. It responded with a gentle, "Mother," instead of attempting to eject the volatile objects, and then exploded in a shower of sand. Naruto wasted no time in turning his tail and charging at the dome of sand that contained the real Gaara, who seemed to be chanting inside his cover. As Naruto used his flame dance to cut the line of sand floating in the air in half, he thought, "First I have to cut off that clone's connection to him." Naruto proceeded to step 2 after finishing that. As he ran through rapid seals, Naruto took a breath and exhaled, "Fire style, Grand Fireball Jutsu." The enormous fireball struck the sand dome, blocking Naruto's view, but he didn't slow down because he knew he wouldn't have a very big hole. A huge strand of sand grew from the dome, slapping him away like a fly as he bounced on the ground, barely managing to crawl backwards as it struck down at him again like a scorpion's tail. Naruto realized his mistake seconds too late as he leapt at the smoldering remnants of his attack, only to discover that the dome was unaffected by the fire. He finally had enough time to roll backwards to his feet and attempt to jump away, but Gaara's clone reappeared and choked him while keeping his hands apart. He glanced to the side, as best he could, and discovered that although he had thought this was the original clone, it was a newly made one. Naruto said, "You can't control the clone in your dome at the same time, huh?" And the clone gave the blonde a half-hearted glare as he started to enlarge, absorbing more of Naruto every second until he was completely encased in the sand clone, which now appeared hilariously bloated. Or at least it would have been hilarious if the onlookers hadn't realized that a live human being was inside. With a single hand seal, the clone uttered, "You talk too much, Naruto Uzumaki." Sand coffin. Then, with a sickening crunching sound that no one focused on for too long, the sand clone immediately shrank back to its initial size. Genma looked pitifully at the girl as he leapt to the ground to call the match, and the heartbroken scream of Hinata, "Naruto-kun," broke the silence that had fallen over the arena like glass. It was a miracle in and of itself that Sakura was able to contain the screaming girl. The clone abruptly grabbed its mouth and clenched its hand over it, saying, "By manner of execution, the winner is." His words were interrupted when flames jumped out of the clone's mouth, then it doubled over, holding its stomach, before it exploded, hitting the ground and wall with a loud crunch of smashing glass. "By manner of execution, the winner is," he said. With Naruto covered from head to toe in a red aura of anger, this did little to calm anyone's nerves, with the exception of Hinata, who finally managed to escape Sakura and run to the railing. Sensibly, Genma leapt away, this time from high above, the cage's box. Naruto roared, charging at the dome as all the sand seemed to condense into a thick spike that hurtled at him. "You tried to kill me, that I can forgive. You got me in my new clothes all dirty, it's harder, but I can forgive that. What I can't forgive is you making Hinata-chan cry." Naruto blew out, fire style. Fire Dragon Flame Bullet. As the stream of sand was met by an equally powerful stream of yellow, blue flames that turned it into glass. Naruto leapt on top of the sand, using it to take him directly to Gaara, whose chanting was louder than ever. Naruto directed his flames toward the dome of dense sand, causing the area directly in front of him to turn to glass as he crashed through. He briefly disappeared from view until a body blasted out of the dome like a volcanic eruption, followed seconds later by a stream of fire from below him as Naruto arrived at the floating Gaara, who was stunned when Naruto's foot struck his chin. "You want my blood? Well, you got it. Scorching hot," Naruto was shouting as he flipped Gaara over and put his arms around her. Naruto started to spin as soon as they were pointing down, and as they fell to the ground, the fire shot out of his feet. Kiba, meanwhile, was flinching as he thought back to his own experience with the move. He heard Lee gasp with excitement next to him. Lee began to say, "Guy, sensei, that's," but Kiba interrupted him. Kiba asked, "Yeah, I guess you didn't get to see him use it in the preliminaries. No one told you about it?" Lee nodded negatively while glancing at the junior genin. Kiba nodded to the two as they fell to the ground, and Lee gave him a curious look. "Huh, well, needless to say, Naruto apologized for stealing your move, but if you ask me, his version is scarier than yours, no offense." Gaara and company were buried in the ground as Naruto barely completed the move by switching to a shadow clone as they approached the ground. The sand he had attempted to use to cushion the blow turned to glass due to the move's extreme heat. The shadow clone had covered itself in explosive tags, and Naruto's cloak billowed as the explosion occurred behind him, completing the appearance. Flare bomb. Despite likely suffering a concussion from the sudden change in air pressure from falling so fast and being within 10 feet of a huge explosion, Naruto had the smuggest expression on his face. Leaning against the large piece of glass that had once been Gaara's sand dome, he closed his eyes and sighed in relief. This was possibly the only thing that saved his life as he felt the attack and put all of his strength into his legs before jumping away as two large, bulky, sand arms with blue veins crashed to the ground as Gaara lifted himself out of the crater, glass shards sticking out of his body. He then screamed bloody murder, "My blood! You'll pay for this, Uzumaki." And when he looked up, his eyes met Naruto's, and the blonde Jinchuriki looked into Shukaku's eyes. Looking at Gaara now, it wouldn't have seemed out of place to say that he looked strange. He had been covered like a coat by the sandy form of the Shukaku, which extended down his hands and arms, wrapped around his back, and then went up to cover his nose, eyes, and hair. He didn't appear any less menacing. Naruto snarled as he pushed himself to his feet and reached into his kunai pouch to hurl a few at the Suna Nin's bare stomach, but he quickly crossed his large arms, allowing the metal to hardly penetrate at all. Gaara then roared at the blonde, who just managed to roll to the side. He sent a moderate-sized fireball at his back and rolled through more hand seals as he looked for Naruto. But as Gaara turned and swung his tail at the stone Naruto was hiding behind, the sand covered Jinchuriki's tail appeared to have an independent will and easily cut through the attack. As exhausted as he was from his 2 hard battles, Naruto would have liked to think he could have avoided the attack, but Gaara's tail just flew across the air at him much more quickly than he could have. Gaara's tail sent him flying back, tumbling across the ground as the glass splintered into his body, even though he was able to avoid most of it. However, as he forced himself to stand up and wiped his mouth with the back of his hand, the cuts disappeared in sudden bursts of red. And it was fortunate that he had been able to stand up when his hurriedly constructed clone threw him in a crude judo throw, which Gaara quickly crushed with a hammer blow. Naruto managed to right himself in midair and landed in a crouch, sliding back while many shadow clones appeared next to him. Gaara, however, appeared to lose it when Naruto received additional assistance that prevented him from bleeding. Sand started to cover his belly as he roared in anger, exposing only his legs beneath the miniature shukaku. Gaara displayed his freshly sanded over chest, which now bulged as numerous mouths appeared all over his body, while he continued to roar, which now sounded more like a screeching wail. Gaara shouted, "Wind release! Great sandy breakthrough!" The crowd of Narutos responded in various ways as the many mouths sent a gale force wind at them. As he watched the others turn and face the attack, only to be reduced to ashes by the powerful attack, those closest to the real Naruto instantly formed a basket for him before hurling him up and over the attack. He gasped as the blonde Jinchuriki made a safe landing. Even with a fight this intense, he could fight for hours on end, but Gaara's unrelenting quest for Naruto's blood and life would require him to take a break. He started running at the blonde, the odd tail ready to hit him, even after Gaara had noticed him. The blonde did something foolish and threw his rotund body at Naruto, causing him to fall backwards. He used chakra to reinforce his legs as he kicked upwards, planting both in Gaara's bloated stomach and sending twin jets of flames from them as he was sent flying back from the attack. However, his tail proved to be more than just decoration, swatting Naruto away before immediately digging into the ground and securing Gaara as he landed in a roll. He stood with his arms crossed, and then a large number of shurikens bounded out of them. By his present standards, Gaara exclaimed calmly, "Sand Shuriken." Naruto jumped to his feet after the spiky tail rang his head. He didn't have time to summon enough chakra for one of his better jutsu, such as his flame bullet, which he would likely need to pierce Gaara's heavy, juggernaut style armor, or the grand fireball jutsu, which was sufficiently widespread to cover all incoming projectiles. Rather, he used his initial fire jutsu, supplemented by a clone that materialized with a thought. Tiny sparks of fire littered the air as he exhaled after passing through the 3 required seals. As his clone completed the combination jutsu, each spark grew to the size of a softball, and he declared, "Fire style. Ember storm." Naruto's clone behind him blew out a breath, a gust of wind enlivening the once tiny embers. Wind style. Great breakthrough. With the extra power, the attack pierced Gaara's, pelting his body with fireballs, but he dismissed them without much consideration while glaring at Naruto, who couldn't help but smirk back. Naruto inhaled deeply as he prepared to launch a much more potent attack, and his clone followed suit, but Gaara wasn't going to allow them to win so easily. With a loud growl, he started to stomp while wildly swinging his arms and wagging his tail, just like Hinata had done before. Unconsciously, sand started to pour out of the earth, gradually turning the stones close to him into sand while Gaara cried out, "Sandstorm Jutsu." What followed was complete chaos as sand started to spread throughout the arena in a way that was predicted by the name, but Naruto was unprepared for this as the sand literally tore up the ground, tearing up trees and boulders as the tiny particles started to shred everything. The power of nature truly astounded Naruto, who began to question how a village could survive in a desert where sandstorms could occur multiple times a week. He did the only thing he could think of. He closed his eyes to allow the flying grid to blind him, and he took a deep breath on the paper cylinder he had replaced. But he was taken by surprise when he was pulled from his hiding spot behind the glass dome, which was somehow still intact, and something slithered around his neck, strangling him. It seemed to him that the storm subsided the moment Gaara's gaze met his. After a few moments of mentally face-palming, Naruto received his response. How did I not sense him coming? He's like a walking can of garbage in terms of chakra, all that Yuki. He had attempted something similar in Wave to locate Zabuza and Haku's hiding place, but had failed to pick them up in the mist of chakra. A later part of the silent killing technique, as Kakashi had explained to him, was to match your chakra output to the chakra mist you were hiding in. Gaara's sand seemed to function similarly. As Gaara watched his eyes, he tightened his tail's grip around the blonde's neck, severing his oxygen supply while Naruto gasped in a last-ditch effort to breathe. Naruto used a final tactic he had learned from Kyuubi during one of their conversations when he saw the savage excitement on Gaara's face. A slow line of smoke rose from the middle of Gaara's tail, and he grimaced as he forced his dying oxygen supply to his brain to focus intently on his tail, experiencing a similar primal joy as Gaara's face twitched. The sand-covered Jinchuriki screeched as he threw Naruto with more than enough force to snap his neck, but Naruto was made of stronger material. Finally, he made the last nail in the coffin by barely getting his little finger through the loop of a kunai and grabbing it, sinking it into the red spot on Gaara's tail. Gaara appeared to understand this, though, because a few seconds later, his injured tail sought retribution by striking Naruto squarely in the chest. The tip spun as he struck the arena wall, and he spat blood as he felt the tail pierce through his skin and jacket. Still coughing up blood, Naruto pulled back and collapsed to the ground. Gaara screamed, "Uzumaki, I'm going to kill you," and then appeared to calm down, his saffron eyes disappearing behind his sandy lids. Naruto taunted, rising slowly as Gaara's arms reached forward, palms facing each other, and he felt the air shift as he made the decision to turn tail and flee for his life. "So you keep saying, but so far all you've done is screamed and threw a tantrum." However, he clutched his chest tightly from the wound, unable to run. Naruto attempted to dive sideways, but the blow still caught his shoulder as he screamed, aware that it was dislocated. Looking at Gaara's motionless form, one could see a basketball-sized ball of condensed sand between his palms. Another ball had already started to form, and Gaara didn't appear prepared to stop the oncoming attacks. Gaara seemed to mutter, "Sand bomb," over the sound of sand exploding all around. Naruto was forced to repeatedly avoid the explosive sand-based attack, but he was able to create a shadow clone just in time to replace it. This was made possible by some quick thinking and a true miracle. Gaara finally paused his attack to take a deep breath, and Naruto followed suit, albeit for different reasons. Gaara screamed, "Why won't you just die, Uzumaki?" Naruto began to respond, but Gaara's sinuous tail shot up from the ground and struck him in the air as his breath left him, his limp body thumping muffledly to the ground. The entire arena fell silent, including Gaara, who stopped to watch Naruto struggle to stand up while coughing and eventually reaching his knees before coughing up blood, which he cupped to catch it. "Grr, die, air bullet!" exclaimed Gaara, puffing up his chest as he hit it, a concussive air bullet aimed directly at the blonde who had been killed. Sorry man," Naruto said, barely making contact with the sand with his hand as he completed the final seal, when a summoning circle materialized. A dark purple toad, about 3 times Naruto's size, with spikes all over its body, emerged in a plume of smoke, looking agitated as it turned to reprimand Naruto, only to be struck in the face by Gaara's air bullet. The toad croaked evilly and turned to glare at Gaara. "Uzumaki-san, we will talk about this later. I've told you before not to summon me during the day, it's too sunny." Yeah, I know Gamamashi. But you're the only horned toad I can summon, and you don't have to actually fight the Tanuki prick, just keep him busy. Then, you can get back to napping." Naruto complained, slowly rising to his feet as he jumped back Gamamashi, rolling his eyes as he assumed what looked like a sumo stance, and half-lidded his eyes to gaze at Gaara's sand-covered form. He casually observed Gaara as she charged the toad, who sighed, flipped the Tanuki with ease, and then sat on his back. "It's called rumination, you blonde annoyance." In the meantime, Naruto was conversing with his furry companion while sitting in a meditative state. Naruto asked rhetorically, "Hey Fuzzy, think you could spare some chakra to help me fix myself up perhaps?" While the giant fox merely gave him a glare. Kyuubi responded cynically, "Think you could loosen the seal a bit more?" Naruto shot him a sardonic glance. Kyuubi growled, and Naruto growled back as he stalked in the direction of the collared fox. "I only made that deal with you because you're too weak to beat my pathetic little brother on your own. If you can't even beat his keeper, then you have no chance in hell of beating the Uchiha." Naruto gritted his teeth and growled, "What does that mean? And don't even act like you didn't jump at the chance for a little freedom from that cage." Naruto did something very stupid, and the Kyuubi roared at him. He jumped up and punched the Kyuubi's nose as hard as he could, stunning the giant fox. "I'm simply saying that the Uchiha could probably finish the stupid Tanuki off in one move. You can't blame me that you are incapable of ending your opponents, you're too soft," the Kyuubi said. After Naruto said, "Silence fox. I can make your stay in here very unpleasant, now give me just enough to fix my shoulder and then I'll leave you alone until Sandy comes out to play." "Okay." The Kyuubi considered devouring the little blonde, but decided against it. Most likely, he would give him indigestion. The fox sat back down and wrapped one of his opulent tails around Naruto, channeling the tiniest amount of Yuki into the blonde to fix his shoulder. "Fine, but if you come back, you better be missing at least 2 limbs and maybe some organs too." Naruto reluctantly said, "Thanks, Fluffy," before departing the mindscape. Now that he was gone, Kyuubi put his head back down to watch the fight while pouting and carefully touching his nose with one of his paws. Naruto opened his eyes and rolled his shoulders, one after the other, to ensure they were functioning correctly. Upon discovering that they were, he stood grinning and charged at the beleaguered Gaara, surrounded by 3 clones. Naruto commanded, "I need you to pin his tail down, Mashi, then you can go." "Okay." The horned toad nodded grudgingly, not out of fear but rather because he was bored and the foolish Tanuki had succeeded in shoving a lot of sand down his throat. Gamamashi bit his tongue as he dispelled for a moment, confusing Gaara, who was searching for his opponent, as a clone sprang up the toad's back and leapt into the air. The air. Born clone called out, "I haven't got to try this move before, hope it works okay." Summing Jutsu. Food cart Jutsu. Gamamashi then reappeared in the air, slamming down on Gaara's tail and crushing it as the Tanuki roared in pain. Gamamashi attempted to turn around and crush this toad in sand, but he was pinned in place because he was unable to move his tail. A second Naruto clone ran up and leapt off Gamamashi's back before he could figure out how to do it. This time, the toad let him know that he was not happy as the clone smirked and flipped into the air. The third and last Naruto clone did the same on the opposite side, using the real Naruto as a springboard while buzz-sawing in the air and clapping their hands together as they reached the peaks of their arcs simultaneously. The twin clones yelled, "Wind style! Flying swallow jutsu!" and they swung down, striking Gaara in the front and back. For a moment, he appeared unharmed, but then bright blue blood spurted from his body, and his sand cloak split in 2 as it fell to the side. Gaara appeared terrified for the first time as both clones dispelled, just in time for the real Naruto to emerge from the smoke with a swirling ball in his hands. "Blistering bomb!" he yelled as he slammed it into Gaara's chest. For the first time, Gaara was unprotected by his sand when an explosion struck him squarely in the chest, sending him flying backward and bouncing across the ground before collapsing into a lifeless heap on the sandy floor. Breathing heavily, Naruto knelt beside Gamamashi and stared at his trembling hand, which had just exploded at his fellow Jinchuriki. Nevertheless, he reached over and gave Mashi a pat on the side. Naruto said, "Good job, Mashi. You can get back to your ruminations." The purple toad nodded before disappearing in a cloud of smoke. Genma waited for the downed redhead to stand up, but he fell to the ground instead, giving Naruto a grateful smile. Naruto remained composed and nodded. Genma yelled, "Well, it looks the winner by knockout is Na." But the face-down Jinchuriki interrupted with a loud moan and started to scream. Gaara yelled, "No, no, no, I won't lose here. I won't let my EXISTANCE be removed, not now or ever. Mother." Naruto jumped back, his eyes wide. After noticing what he was doing, Genma leapt back to his isolated alcove above the arena floor, only to discover that he was looking directly into the eyes of the Shukaku, who had materialized in a huge sand tsunami, wailing with delight. With the nerves of the crowd jangled, Shukaku cried out, "Oh yeah, I finally got out of that decrepit place. It feels good to be out again, baby." He started to look around, his manic eyes sweeping over them, but he gave up when he felt a tiny tickle below. He looked down in bewilderment and saw a little boy with blonde hair spitting fire at him like a dragon with too much energy. Naruto used chakra to boost his voice as he yelled, "Hey you, how about you pick on someone your own size?" The oversized Tanuki appeared perplexed by the directive. Naruto could hear the Shukaku's wailing voice as he yelled down, "Ha ha ha ha. Like who? None of you could take me on. Certainly not a little pipsqueak like you, instead. You ready to assert your dominance, Fox?" Naruto asked, and if he was right, he received both a mental nod of assent and excitement. As he channeled chakra to his feet, fire erupted from the bottoms and he launched himself into the air like a rocket, murmuring to himself, "Okay, here we go." Naruto boasted cockily, "Oh yeah, I'll take you down in one hit," and everyone rolled their eyes at the ridiculous assertion. Soon after, only the Junin and Hokage realized that instead of panicking and attempting to flee, as they nearly had, everyone had fallen silent to watch the crazy blonde try to carry out his claim. At the wild claim, even Orochimaru, who had his hands half up to launch the invasion, froze. Since this was the Kyuubi Jinchuriki, he would cause trouble unless he was taken out early. If the boy was successful, the snake Sannin would have to come and congratulate the blonde on his seemingly impossible task. If he failed, well, it would just be one less obstacle during the invasion. He continued to rise higher and higher with Naruto before leveling out roughly 50 feet above Shukaku's head. He had to control his excitement at that moment if he was going to execute this move. Though his hands appeared to blur, he ran methodically through the seals. He inhaled as the Kyuubi started to replenish his reserves with his Yuki. though Naruto could tell the difference between the fox's Yuki and his own chakra because of how strong it felt. In fact, his thoughts returned to the earlier part of the day. Rewind. The Kyuubi snarled at Naruto as he stood composedly in front of the steel bars of his cage. Kyuubi asked, "What are you doing here, brat?" Naruto grinned and approached, holding out his hand. Knowing the answer, Naruto arrived early to give himself enough time to work out a deal. "I've come to ask for your help during the upcoming fight. I'm going to fight the Shukaku, and I'll need your chakra to beat him, especially with what I have planned. So will you help me?" he asked. Kyuubi bellowed, "Hell no, you stupid brat. You think I'm going to just help you?" Naruto sighed as the gust of wind struck him. As Kyuubi stood to growl at him, he crossed his arms over his chest and said, "I figured as much, so I'm willing to work out a deal." Kyuubi hesitated at the blonde's statement. Kyuubi inquired, "A deal? What kind of deal?" With genuine interest. He had been ready for a brawl involving shouting, posing, and general demands when his jailer had come in, but the blonde appeared to act more rationally. Naruto said, already reaching forward to adjust the seal, "How about I loosen the seal a little for you? Let you out of that cage? It looks pretty claustrophobic in there, and I'm going to be fighting a Biju, and I plan on showing the village that I'm not to be taken lightly. You play with matches and you'll get burned sort of lesson, you know. So you'll weaken the seal if I give you some of my Yuki? What else is in it for you? That seems highly biased to me, and I know by now that you're not that stupid." Even though Kyuubi's voice was calm, Naruto would have been nearly knocked back if he hadn't used chakra to secure himself to the ground. "We'll call it even if you tell me what will happen if I loosen this seal too much. Does that sound good?" With a paintbrush in hand, Naruto started painting over the seal paper. He said, "Yes, since I can't leave until the seal is completely removed, it won't really matter how loose you make it. But the more loose you make it, the easier you can call up my Yuki, but the harder it'll be for you to control yourself while under the influence." Kyuubi replied, the bars disappearing as a collar appeared around his neck as he sat down, Naruto's mindscape enveloping him now that his cage had been dissolved, and he found himself beneath a large rotunda inside a massive library, with a stained glass overhead depicting the Kyuubi enthralled in battle with the fourth Hokage. Lifting himself up, he discovered that the floor beneath him was tiled in the Uzumaki swirl pattern, with the outer circle holding the Shikifuin. Naruto looked around gratefully before turning and leaving. End of flashback. After completing the first step, he worked on his side, cupping his hands as if he were going to yell. He then started to compress as much wind chakra as he could into the small space between his palms, feeling it push against him and sever his palms. "Are you ready?" With Kyuubi snorting in assent, Naruto asked in his head. He nearly grinned before realizing that he was pressed for time and that suppressing this much chakra was actually hurting him. "I think this is my strongest jutsu. In addition to the temperature, the cost of the chakra alone could defeat most of the shinobi in the village. Nevertheless, I need to let go of the fire that is bottled up in my bones. Cannon hellfire!" Naruto roared, exhaling what would have been a huge stream of fire that could have rivaled the Shukaku. However, Naruto had not stopped there. Instead, he had crammed as much wind-based chakra as he could into his palms. When the first flame struck the wind, the stream exploded in size, covering the arena and the sand-based Biju in a tsunami of white fire. A huge glass sculpture the size and shape of a Shukaku was left behind after the attack, which lasted only 10 seconds, subsided. "Fine." Naruto moaned and reached into his coat to retrieve a soldier pill to prevent himself from falling into the black spots on the edge of his vision. He flipped over as he hit the ground below, using the remaining chakra from the pill to activate his fire shoes and slow down his descent. When Naruto hit the ground, he was astounded to see Gaara staring up at the glass structure with real tears in his eyes. "Mother. Talk to me, mother." A loud crackling was heard, and Naruto felt the hate leave his body as Gaara sounded as though he was pleading, "Mother, what's wrong? Speak to me, please." When Naruto looked up, he saw that the glass was breaking, and he saw that Gaara was standing beneath it, completely unaware of the danger. Naruto did something that he would never have thought to do in this situation, apart from Hinata-chan, but that was neither here nor there, and he forced himself to stand up. Bum! Rushing Gaara as he tackled the Suna Jinchuriki out from under the glass structure just as it broke into a blizzard of glass flying down on the two. "What gives you your strength? You defeated Mother in a single move, and no one has ever been strong enough to overcome her." Gaara screamed. You ended her existence, but I can't prove my existence without Mother." Naruto attempted to smile, but it came out more as a grimace because his back was pierced with glass fragments and his skin was barely an inch thick from the cuts. As the glass shower came to an end, Naruto hissed or whispered, trying desperately to stand but failing, My precious people prove my existence by respecting me, acknowledging me, and loving me. My father claims that because I am a demon, I am incapable of loving or receiving love. Gaara's eyes gleamed as he said, even my brother and sister look at me with those scared looks, and won't touch me. A few seconds later, Naruto made a mistake. He grabbed a long piece of glass off his arm and held Gaara's hand while he cut it open. Gaara cried out and stared at the blood. I'm bleeding blood. Naruto growled loud enough to attract this attention after he yelled. He paused his speech to lift his own heavily bleeding hand, which he pressed to Gaara, their blood mingling. Yes, you're bleeding, that means you're not a demon. Demons don't bleed, only humans bleed red like this, see, he said. We are now blood brothers, bound together by our shared burdens, having shared blood there. We are the keepers of the demons, the guardians of our beloved people. We are not demons, are we? Then, for the first time since he could remember, Gaara put his arms around Naruto's neck and hugged him while tears streamed from his eyes. Naruto asked, and Gaara looked shocked at the words as he looked between the blood on his hand and Naruto's gentle but agonized smile. A sand clone started to form behind Naruto, reaching down to pick up a shard of glass and moving slowly and shakily on the bare blonde, unaware that he was stunned, a feeling that Temari and Kankuro in the stands also shared. He would demonstrate to the blonde that a Biju didn't go down so easily, that he couldn't just drop in and erase years of pain and hurt. But the clone that was currently under Shukaku's control was not prepared for Gaara to turn Naruto over and block the sand clone's attempt to murder his first friend. Set aside Gaara and allow Mother to once more shield you. He is deceiving you in order to kill you and establish his existence when you are not looking. Gaara turned to face the bleeding Naruto, who even now had tiny red flashes all over his body as he removed glass, the cut healing. He's too strong for us, we have to kill him now or we'll never be able to, the clone said. No. Naruto.ni.san is both my brother and my friend, so you won't harm him. As the sand clone disappeared, Gaara rubbed his hand through it and rasped loudly. Gaara walked over and helped Naruto stand up, saying in his typical monotone, Proctor, I concede. After he was sure the blonde could stand alone, he sat down and stared at his bloody hand. His heart began to flutter, so he reached over with his bloody hand and traced the kanji for love over his heart slowly, the blood drying in the pattern as he recalled what he had learned years before about heart pains. When he reached the top of the stairs, Naruto collapsed onto a bench, his teeth clenched together as he trudged back to the box built into the wall for competitors. Hinata joined him a few moments later and started wiping the blood from his face with a cloth. Naruto looked across the box at Sasuke, who glared at him and turned away. Sakura really wasn't trying to get his attention for once, either because she was stunned into silence or because the match was about to start, but either way, Hinata's stern look at him made Naruto smile. Well, guess that's all the gas in my tank for now, he joked, but it was true because he couldn't get his head out of Hinata's lap, but if he was being honest, there were worse places. You look cute like that, he said, reaching to embrace her, but tipping forward, face landing on her lap. She used all of her strength to reach around Naruto's body and pull the box off his hip. She ignored his protest and shoved them into her pocket, which was right over her breasts, even though her inner voice hoped Naruto would try to take them back. Naruto.kun, you should abstain from smoking. Sakura approached and sat on Naruto's opposite side, gazing at the blonde with a mix of wonder and fear as Hinata reprimanded, this is what happens when you smoke, and I don't want to be with someone who does something so filthy. I'm not a smoker. Fortunately, Naruto was unable to witness Hinata's cheeks turning red at the sensation. Sakura saw, but she merely sighed. Why would think I did, Hinata? Chan, he said, turning his head to the side to speak clearly, his whiskered cheek rubbing against Hinata's smooth leg. Because I witnessed you put one in your mouth as soon as your match began. Hinata's voice sounded like a mix of sorrow and maternal reprimand as she recalled how she had responded when she believed Naruto had passed away, which was dangerous anyway, leaving yourself exposed like that when he was trying to kill you. Naruto replied, if you're referring to the things you just took from me, they're not cigarettes. There was a brief period of silence before he continued, detecting her astonishment at his denial of her charge. Here, hand me one, and I'll show you. Naruto managed to raise one of his hands. No, Naruto.kun, I don't condone your suicide. Hinata said firmly, if you don't take care of your body, then I'll just have to do it for you. Naruto stared at Hinata in shock, and Sakura leaned into the young couple, grinning. Listen to Hinata. Chan, Naruto, offer to look after your physical needs. Sakura, who didn't notice how Sasuke growled under his breath on the other side of the box, said, even I wouldn't have the courage to take care of Sasuke. Kun's body like Hinata would yours. She smirked teasingly as she watched both Naruto and Hinata turn atomic red, then laughed when they were unable to look at each other. "There aren't cigarettes, I swear, I just want to show you," Naruto said, gesturing to Hinata again after he had recovered from his unexpected moment of embarrassment. Hinata reluctantly nodded, pulled the box out just enough to free one, and placed it in Naruto's hand as he unrolled the paper to reveal black kanji written in an odd pattern. "Besides, even if they had a lighter, I wouldn't have one, and even then, I'm too weak to light one," Naruto said. "What is it?" As Hinata gazed at it bewilderedly, her brief outburst of Byakugan revealing nothing, Sakura asked with genuine curiosity. "As you can see, I work with fire frequently, so I made a seal to filter the air I breathe in. Nothing right now, though, because the seal is broken, but it fixes itself if I roll it up." Sakura finished as the other two members of the trio gazed at her. "It helps purify the air I breathe in of airborne toxins and small debris, such as ash, dirt, germs, and," he began. As Naruto nodded and started sucking on the paper, Sakura explained, "Sand, that's why you had it out during your last match, to keep that sand out of your mouth and airways, smart." "Indeed, I began to ponder the concept during our expedition to Wave. Do you recall the Demon Brothers, Hinata? Chan?" When Hinata replaced the box, Naruto handed it back to him, satisfied that it posed no threat to her Naruto.kun. "They wore those rebreathers to let them breathe underwater, and those rain.nin had something like that," Naruto said. She asked the question that had been bothering her for a few seconds. "Which ones have the red tips?" Hinata tried not to give it much thought, but she nearly felt bad when she saw Naruto's fiendish grin and reply, explosive notes. "Will Sakura Haruno and Sasuke Uchiha come down to the field?" Genma said, lowering himself to the ground to announce the next match after the field had been cleared of the majority of the glass. He said, and a few seconds later, the cocky male of Team 7 and the pick-haired female of Team 8 were facing each other. Genma glanced between them and gave a slight, indiscernible nod. "Hajime." Second match of the second round, Genma yelled, jumped back, and quickly made his way up the wall, though this time he chose the lower alcove. Infuriated, Sasuke charged the pinkette, kicking her in the chest with a straight kick that threw her back after Sakura dodged the first couple of shuriken he threw at her, only to be forced to block several with a brandished kunai. As he flipped back to his feet, Sakura rolled into a roll and began weaving seals as Sasuke used his Sharingan to try to copy whatever jutsu she attempted to use. He had attempted to do so during Naruto's last match but had failed because of the thin layer of chakra surrounding the arena floor, which also made it nearly impossible to watch the match while using his dojutsu. The last Uchiha, however, gritted his teeth in frustration as a group of illusionary clones approached him. He looked around and found what he was looking for before charging at one of them and giving her a snap kick to the chin that sent her tumbling. After she stopped, she attempted to get up, wiping blood from her mouth. But as soon as Sasuke felt cold steel against the back of his neck, the brief rush left him. He managed to turn his neck far enough to look behind him and saw Sakura holding a kunai to his neck. "I also used a genjutsu when I created the clones to give the impression that you had struck the real me as I crept up behind you," Sakura said. "Now forfeit Sasuke-kun," with a tense look on her face as Sasuke burst out laughing. "As if such a basic illusion could fool me. What you were doing was painfully clear in front of my eyes," Sasuke said. "Now, show me your true power." Before Sakura could respond, he had already hooked one foot around hers and pulled her down while grabbing the kunai in her hand and slicing open her cheek with it. Sasuke spit spitefully as he threw the kunai at Sakura, who rolled to the side, being kept moving as he tracked her perfectly throwing kunai in an almost lazy manner, constantly giving her just enough time and space to dodge. Instead of pressing the advantage, he held back as she held her now bleeding cheek, trying to send a glare at her crush. "Come on, you pathetic waste, give me a challenge." Sakura exhaled in relief as she emerged from her roll and saw that there was no kunai speeding toward her. However, Sasuke's foot snatched her breath away from her with a snap kick that sent her flying across the floor. "Sakura, why do you keep withholding?" Sasuke growled at the fallen pinkhead and yelled, "Come on, get up, you pathetic waste. You'll never beat me like that." He growled and charged at her, causing her to leap into the air and flip over as he attempted to strike her with an axe kick. Sakura was able to substitute her with a log, which broke when Sasuke's kick struck it. After a few shuriken flew past his head a few seconds earlier, Sasuke rolled backwards into a back handspring and said, "Looks like you still got a little kick in you after all." He immediately flipped over and saw Sakura, who was favoring one side, being forced to throw with her non-dominant hand. With both hands on the ground and chakra to stop his momentum, he landed on the balls of his feet and bounded towards Sakura, sweeping her feet out from under her before kicking straight up into her stomach and sending her flying. As she started to fall back towards him, Sasuke waited a few seconds before launching himself after her and kneeing her in the chest while shouting, "Rolling upper." Sasuke managed to flip himself in midair as he backflipped, sending the pinkette hurtling towards the ground as he completed his flip, aiming downward with his foot as if to stomp on the downed Sakura. After she was sent barrel rolling into the air, he caught her on it and fully extended the leg he had just hit her with. Sasuke watched the edges in case she tried to use it to escape, but Sakura managed to fight through the explosive pain, forced down the rising vomit, and acted out, going with the first thing that came to mind, mainly because she couldn't think of anything to do at the moment. Sakura disappeared in a plume of smoke with a single hand seal. He was momentarily taken aback, though, when the smoke cleared and an auburn wolf appeared in Sasuke's place, able to twist its body around his stomp. "Well, this is fitting, you weak bitch." He spat, but wolf. Sakura snarled and bit his leg deeply, stealing blood from the cocky Uchiha, who screamed as he kicked out, Sakura gracefully dancing around the kick. Sasuke actually decided against trying to grab the hanged Sakura because, even if his eyes could follow her, those fangs and jaws spoke for themselves. Instead, he started to pepper her with shuriken, which she attempted to avoid, but even if she had been hanged, she was still hurt, at least a few broken ribs, and whined as she stumbled upon landing. Sasuke then leapt on her apparent weakness and kicked her in the injured side. As wolf Sakura hit the hard ground, blood dripping from the corner of her mouth, she disappeared in a plume of smoke. The pinkette struggled to stand and slowly began to raise her hand, realizing that she was outmatched and had no chance. Sasuke, apparently, also realized this, as he was on her before she could react, squeezing her bottom jaw tightly. "You dare not forfeit. Now use those tears of yours, and push me, challenge me, give me your strength," he said, and Sakura's hand slowly lowered in defiance of her instincts as Sasuke nodded and pressed directly into her face. "You little broken piece of wasted potential, show me how powerful you are." Sasuke gave the order, and the fangirl whimpered as she resisted the tears that threatened to spill out of her eyes. Sasuke's eyes glowed with anger as he choked, slammed her into the ground after she whispered, "No, I won't use them." "You stupid." Despite her cries, he lifted her up and kicked her injured side. Horrible, he dropped her on the ground, stomping her knee as it twisted the wrong way. Broken, he knelt down, placing his hands tightly in her short hair and painfully pulling her head back as he bent down to hiss into her ear. "Waste of potential. Fangirl, no one could ever love someone as broken and helpless as you. All you are is a broken, worthless failure." Before someone grabbed his arm from behind, he repeatedly slammed her face into the ground. Genma pulled Sasuke up and said, "Stop, she's done." The haughty Uchiha pulled free and left without even looking back, and Genma glared at him before getting to his feet and projecting his voice using chakra. "Sasuke Uchiha is the winner of the match," Genma said. "In 5 minutes, the penultimate match between Shino Aburame and Hinata Hyuga will begin." As medical personnel hurried onto the field, placed Sakura on a stretcher, and fled, Genma made the announcement. As the Inuzuka heir ran off towards the stairs, Kurenai, who was not far behind him, stooped and bowed quickly to the others. "Pardon Kiba, he usually doesn't think about others when someone he's close to gets into trouble," said Kurenai. Up in the section designated for senseis and teammates, Kiba leapt to his feet, Akamaru leapt onto his shoulder before burrowing into his coat. "Excuse us." The Team 8 sensei then disappeared, followed by her pupil. He put his head down in his hands as the group turned to face Kakashi, who was relieved that he had delayed teaching the Uchiha Saiyan his signature assassination jutsu because he had assumed Sasuke was improving after their month-long training, hadn't acted haughty, hadn't nagged Kakashi for a powerful jutsu, and hadn't even brought up his brother or Naruto. Guy's stony gaze was visible through his hair when he felt a hand on his shoulder. "Kakashi, why did you?" Guy asked, but Kakashi's irate reply interrupted him. "Why did I leave him with that mindset? Not tell the Hokage about it, accept this conduct from my pupil? Guy is unknown to me. Perhaps because I believed it was being dealt with?" Kakashi retorted, and Guy appeared taken aback by the unexpected outburst. Taking a deep, soothing breath, Kakashi said, "I apologize. I simply need to be left alone. I am unsure of how to handle it, but I am aware that if nothing is done, his rage and hatred will consume him just as it did Itachi. I would have asked you how you dealt with Neji's anger before today, but I don't think that will be an issue for long." Kakashi looked down in despair, knowing that Guy's hand was still on his shoulder. "Well, if the prior games are any indication, you appeared to have trained the other two well. Speaking of which, should we attend the upcoming game to witness the youthful prowess of Hyuga-san?" Kakashi raised his head to look at the arena floor below, where his lone female student was waiting, and laughed sarcastically as Guy said that. "All right, Let's start the penultimate matches of the Chunin finals if both competitors are prepared. Hinata nodded, resolved to prolong the battle as much as possible to allow Naruto to recuperate from the borderline chakra exhaustion he had experienced in his battle with Gaara. Genma asked, glancing between the two. Well then, Haji. Shino's monotonous voice, which was the epitome of statuesque, interrupted Genma's loud voice. I give it up, Proctor.san. Shino waited for a moment before turning to go, heading for the medic bay, whether for the aforementioned poison or to be with his team. My bugs are still busy neutralizing the poison I was hit with in my last match, and the adrenaline of a fight would only slow my recovery, he said. Genma said softly so that only Hinata could hear him, well, I guess you're going to the finals, Hinata.san. Her heart fell. Given the state of affairs, she would need to come up with another way to support Naruto. Hinata Hyuga has won the match. Shino Aburame has forfeited. Genma said, jumping up the side to the first level of seats as he disappeared. There will be an hour break before the final fight, which will be a 3-way between Naruto Uzumaki, Sasuke Uchiha, and Hinata Hyuga. With a sigh, Hinata turned and jogged back to Naruto, who was snoring lightly. She lifted his head and slid back under him, placing his head on her lap. He wriggled slightly and put his arms around her waist, giving her a light squeeze while murmuring, Hinata. My Hinata. Chan. Hinata fought the urge to blush as she considered the best way to assist Naruto.kun. A rushing medic.nin nearly knocked Shino down as he entered the infirmary with his usual level of complacency and nonchalance, but he quickly looked around and saw his sensei and teammate. Not that Kiba making such a scene was hard. Man, tell us something, please. Those found disturbing patients and staff will be removed. Kiba snarled and turned to sit on the bench on the opposite wall after yelling at a medic.nin who ignored the screaming Inuzuka except to point to a sign. Kurenai. Sensei, why won't they tell us something? That can't be encouraging. As Shino sat next to his male teammate, their sensei, on the opposite side, Akamaru nuzzled deeper into his coat and whimpered softly as the Inuzuka heir moaned, leaning on his knees and staring at the ground. Kiba jumped up and hurried to the side of the bed, reaching for Sakura but pausing with his hand above hers. The three of them sat in silence for 10 more minutes before the curtain opened to reveal Sakura lying in bed, motionless as death. Akamaru crawled out and leapt onto the bed to nose at Sakura's motionless hand, but she didn't react. No, she can't be. Kiba trailed off as he took a step back, wiping at his eyes as he noticed his vision becoming blurry as the moisture started to accumulate. She smells like ammonia, and a lot of morphine. We had to give her a strong sedative. We could tell she was in a lot of pain because she was moving too much. As for the ammonia, I'll leave that up to our resident psychoanalyst. Here he is now. The medic.nin pointed to a middle-aged man who was approaching and had the distinctive platinum blonde hair of the Yamanaka. He walked past Kiba without saying anything and only stopped to inquire, is she prepped? After getting a nod of approval, he gently put both hands on either side of the pinkette's head before he sank back into a chair. It should only take about 30 minutes for him to finish up, so in the meantime, follow me and we'll get you fixed up. The medic.nin said, gesturing for Shino to follow her to an open bed, which was conveniently right next to Sakura's one. Okay. Well, first of all, it's difficult for me to diagnose anything because your bugs are interfering, but since I can't find any bleeding, there isn't much I can do other than recommend bed rest. The medic.nin's hands started to glow green as she ran them over Shino's body, her lips tightening at times. She turned to leave as Shino nodded silently, and Kurenai sighed in relief that at least one of her students was seriously injured. The three fell silent again, watching the Yamanaka do his job while waiting for the verdict. Gaara was much more likely to help the Leaf now, but it was of little consequence because the Shukaku was defeated and could not be turned on the invasion force. You had to enjoy the little things in life. Meanwhile, Orochimaru was using his considerable self-control not to throw a tantrum right there in the cage box, which seriously damaged the invasion plan. The disguised Sannin said casually, this year's stock is much more outstanding than usually. Hiruzen laughed teasingly. That's true, but what do you think? Shikamaru, Hinata, and Sasuke are all descended from well-known Konoha clans. All three of your children are finalists, although we only got really see your youngest one's skill. Finally, Naruto.kun graduated with honors from the Shinobi Academy. The third said happily, his arms concealed within his voluminous sleeves. But from what I've heard, no one has done that since Itachi Uchiha. Orochimaru asked, his eyes widening. If that were the case, how can he still be a genin? The snake questioned his sensei, who gave his former pupil a sly smile. With a casual remark, Sarutobi said, the same way your son made such a good showing when he's the youngest one. Speaking of, if I didn't know better, I'd say you planned on Gaara losing control here in the middle of my village. The elderly third may be serving his second term, but he could still intimidate the snake Sannin when required. Speaking of losing control, I don't know how the blonde can keep going, even with an hour break to recuperate, Orochimaru said, leaning back in his chair and crossing his arms to keep his former sensei from seeing the small green snake that slithered down his leg and through a crack in the wall, heading for Kabuto, who was still hiding in the crowd 2 levels below. He had to contend with my son and his Biju in addition to a Hyuga prodigy. The man smirked confidently and added, and he'll have to face both the Hyuga heiress and the Uchiha heir in the next round. Yes, young Naruto-kun is still a possibility. He did graduate with honors, as I mentioned, and he hasn't been kicking back. I can say that Naruto hasn't even reached his peak yet because I have even supervised some of his training alongside Jiraiya, my strongest student. Orochimaru started to ramble, sweating as he remembered how long his sensei could ramble incoherently. It is concerning how old not just him, but all these young ones make me feel, running around and fighting with so much vigor, Sarutobi said. Sarutobi. Sensei's claims are hard for me to believe, but if he's correct, I might be able to work this out. In the finals, Naruto-kun and Sasuke-kun will battle and exhaust one another. If Naruto wins, then I can just start the invasion and make my escape with Sasuke's body, and if Sasuke wins, I'll just mark Naruto for safekeeping. The traitorous Sannin thought with masked glee. When it popped, Naruto sat up with a groan, rolling his shoulder. He yawned widely, blinked his eyes multiple times, and held his head as the splitting headache set in. He reached into his coat and took out his small book, opening to the marked page. This seems a little disrespectful to me, but we're shinobi, not samurai. Now I just have to make sure I can manage this. The blonde thought, walking to the side, make a quick set of 7 seals and placing his hand on the stone wall around the arena. Reaching behind him, he held his neck as he rolled his neck, feeling his plan take hold. It's exactly as the history books described it. Shinobi can fight to their heart's content in this arena, which the fourth designed to work like a sealing scroll in conjunction with an absorption seal. However, it wasn't configured correctly to more readily absorb residual chakra. As the foreign chakra entered the base of his brainstem and mixed with his chakra pathways after being redirected through his seal, turning Shukaku's leftover Yuki into usable chakra, Naruto thought, I need the strength, but it probably would if it was left lingering for long enough. Even though it's not much, I should be able to compete with 1 or 2 Junin. Or at the very least, get rid of these annoying twinges. He remarked somewhat irritably as he felt a slight warmth spread across his body as his many wounds healed. He grinned and then scowled at the noticeable decrease in his chakra. That seems to use more than I had anticipated. Well, it should be sufficient for my needs, he remarked before he left. Hinata, who genuinely hoped Naruto would come up with a more secure plan, was also seen meditating as she tried to think of a way to delay Sasuke in the finals long enough for Naruto to come up with his own absurd plan, but she cared for him too much to push it. She inhaled deeply and sensed the presence sitting next to her, grinning subtly as Naruto pushed her. Naruto chuckled softly, leaned forward on his knees, and closed his eyes as he reached over to hold Hinata's hand. The brunette smiled and interlaced her fingers with his. Hey you. He said joyfully, and Hinata replied quietly, it's me. Are you prepared for this? With his hair blowing in the wind, he posed the question. As Naruto sighed, she responded thoughtlessly, no, I'm worried that something is going to go wrong down there and you'll get hurt. When we get on that floor, it won't be me that matters. I want you to be safe if it comes to that. Hinata leaned over and rested her head on his shoulder as the blonde said, no take lethal hits for me. He hardly opened his eyes. Yes, since you won't follow suit. The blonde slumped lower as he leaned back and gazed up into the sun. Hinata said, you know we have to go into that fight together or Sasuke will not only beat us but most likely aim to maim and I like you without any more scars. You've been snooping around me, then. Oh no, the esteemed Hyuga heiress was examining my unclean body. Do you lack propriety? Naruto teased, and Hinata pouted and flushed before pushing him, who smiled and pushed her back. He thought she would stop there, but then she struck him, toppling them both, with Hinata on top and straddling Naruto's waist. Naruto-kun, Hinata. Chan. They said together as they both gulped loudly and looked into each other's eyes. One of the Hyuga's hairs fell loose, and Naruto reached up to gently brush it away, touching her cheek with his calloused knuckles. As she bent down, their lips were inches apart and showed no signs of stopping when. The young couple jumped apart, their faces burning, as Hinata muttered a eep as a female voice called out, Hyuga-san. Both of them saw Narissa's approaching form, which they could only identify by the many bandages covering her body. Where is your sister, Narissa-san? Narissa gave Hinata a sheepish smile in response to her question. Hinata giggled at her admission. I asked her to get me a cup of water, and while she was gone I made a run for it. Naruto smiled amiably and held up a welcoming hand next to her. Anyway, before the final match began, I had to see you. With the Hyuga heiress staring at her bewildered, the elder twin said, I guess I didn't, I just wanted to. Narissa nodded as though to double check her response. About what you said to my sister and me, thank you, and I'd like it very much if we could see the memorial. After giving a single nod, Hinata answered, all right, I'll let the guards know to expect you sometime on Friday. She responded with a nod in agreement, and as the elder opened her mouth to speak again, a loud shout of, Oni. Chan, I told you to stay in your bed, interrupted her. Even though the medic.nin cleared you, if you behave like the younger sister, I won't let you leave my sight. Defiantly glaring at her older sister, Farissa yelled, her hands on her hips. Farissa gave the command, pointing to the ground beneath her feet and punctuating it with a single footstep. Now come here so we can go back down to the infirmary. Narissa stood purposefully near the edge and teased, why don't you come over here and make me? That's not fair, Oni. Chan, you know I hate heights, I don't bring mice into the house, so don't try and use my fear against me or I'm going to leave cheese in your room again. Farissa said, looking conflicted as she observed her sister's position. Come on over here now. Narissa pouted as she reluctantly stalked to her sister's side and followed the girl down the stairs after the younger twin gave another order. Naruto said, well, that was interesting. Hinata nodded and leaned forward on her knees, remembering the reason the twins had scheduled a visit to her clan compound. Rewind. Hinata closed the curtains behind her and said, we have something to speak about. Farissa helped her lean back on her bed, and Narissa shot back, then speak. Things don't just pause just because you want them to, princess. Both girls scowled as they turned to face the bashful heiress, who was pressing her index fingers together. Both girls took sharp breaths, not expecting this from a clan heiress, and Hinata muttered, I don't really know how to say this, but before putting her hands together and bowing to the ground. The brunette apologized, I'm sorry that your parents died. However, one of them, probably Farissa, who appeared to be the more spirited of the two, growled loudly. They were killed by that devil fox, not killed. And why? They didn't deserve that. They never did anything wrong. Farissa yelled, and don't say a single thing about them. They were innocent civilians. They had no part in your fight with that demon. Hinata winced, but neither girl noticed. Farissa went on, accusing Hinata of biting her lip while choking back tears, and her use of the pronoun you gave the impression that she was personally holding Hinata responsible for the entire assault. I apologize. I'm very sorry that you lost both of your parents in such a manner. I'm sorry that I got to know both of my parents, even if my mother is gone now. Hinata apologized once more, saying, I'm so sorry. Over and over again as the tears refused to stop flowing and she kept her head down while the liquid poured. Go now if you believe that crying will make things better. When a hand lightly touched her arm, Farissa screamed and resumed her work. She turned to see Narissa's level expression. Her sister could see the hurt in her eyes as she spoke about their parents, but she didn't appear to feel the same rage Farissa felt for the clan heiress. Hinata, you don't have to apologize. Although we both appreciate it, the fox is to blame, not you. At last, Hinata looked up as Narissa said calmly, you were only a child at the time. You can't be blamed for the pain of losing our parents, despite my sister's words. But I'm to blame. Your parents lost their lives rescuing a young woman who was then expecting a child. My mother was carrying me at the time. The twins began, their eyes hardening as they gazed at the brunette with a new light, while Hinata sobbed and frantically wiped her eyes with her sleeves. My mother used to share with me the tale of the good people who came to her rescue that evening. How your mother and father refused to let her die after discovering her stranded in a room. Their little girls didn't deserve cowards for parents, not because she was a clan wife or because she was pregnant. Despite the heavy stream of tears streaming down their faces, Hinata gulped and glanced hesitantly at the girls who were observing her intently. Narissa choked as she said, gee. Go on. Hinata nodded slightly. How your mother wore her clothes to allow my mom to breathe and then refused to take a break before returning to try to assist your father, and how your father supported the burning rafters when they attempted to collapse. And how, the building. Hinata began, but a reassuring hand on her shoulder interrupted her. Hinata's teary eyes met Narissa's beseeching eyes as she looked up, saying, please stop, we've heard enough. Behind the hurt girl, Hinata could see that Farissa was avoiding eye contact and that her knuckles were chalky white from clenching so tightly. Regardless of what happened, I don't know how you can hold yourself accountable. The elder sister said, and Hinata gave her a sorrowful look. She muttered, I don't know how you can not hate me. She was startled when Narissa seized her and dragged her to her feet while wearing an irate look. Would you prefer that we hated you? Farissa rushed to her side as she started coughing after she yelled. No, I would have preferred it if your parents had abandoned my mother. When your parents had 2 young daughters at home, I would have preferred it if they had been self-centered and not willing to put themselves in danger to save someone. I'd rather. She was interrupted by the sound of Farissa's hand striking her cheek, her face displaying anger despite the stream of tears. Stop talking. Quit talking. Quit. You can leave right away if all you're going to do is cry and try to change something that can't be changed, as I've already told you. Narissa.Nay. Chan is hurt, and this stress isn't helping, regardless of what she says. Despite her instincts, the teary Bluenet remained rooted to the floor when Farissa screamed at her. I apologize. I'll drop it, you're right. Hinata turned and walked away, making sure her trembling body was hidden as she returned to her safe haven, using her Hyuga and Kunoichi training to suppress these emotions. I just wanted to tell you, if you'd like to see it, my mother had a small memorial built in her personal garden in my clan's compound. Flashback termination. Indeed, it was. However, I am genuinely excited to meet them. Because of my job, I didn't have many friends when I was growing up. When Naruto shoved her over, Hinata squealed a little and started to giggle, pleading with him to let her go. It will be nice to show people around my clan compound simply because I want to and not because I was ordered, Hinata said hopefully. Nope, Hina-chan, I will never let you go. Hinata blushed and then smirked as she braced her nerves. Just think of this punishment for not wanting to show me around your home, Naruto said. Is that how you're requesting to come to my room? What should I do to resist these animal cravings? How about you? The Bluenet giggled behind her hand as Naruto turned red enough to match his paramour's well-known blush, despite the heiress's pitiful shake of her head. It was Akamaru who first saw the Yamanaka reanimate as he stood, stretching out his limbs from his rigid sitting position, and the ninja dog alerted his partner to it. Kiba was pacing the floor nervously. Shino was distracted by his father in the adjacent bed. The privacy curtains were pulled for the time being, and Kurenai had gone to get a cup of coffee, which Kiba could smell from several hallways away. Kiba asked eagerly, but the man disregarded the younger shinobi. With one arm hanging limp at his side and the other twisting a strand of his platinum blonde hair, the man said, you wouldn't understand most of what I would tell you, so how about we wait for your sensei to get back, she shouldn't be long. Hey Kurenai. Sensei, it's a good thing you came back because I was about to make this guy tell me what's wrong with Sakura-chan. Kiba began to argue with the blonde when Akamaru pushed him and barked as Kurenai approached behind the short-tempered Inuzuka, a trait that ran in the family. A passing medic.nin frowned at Kiba when he said it aloud. Sorry. He whispered back, bending swiftly to beg for forgiveness. The medic.nin rolled her eyes and left. So, Yamanaka.san, could you please explain my student's condition? Kurenai inquired, and the Yamanaka crossed his arms and nodded. Yes. But would you mind holding off until your other student arrives? I think he'll be done soon. As promised, the privacy curtain was removed a few seconds later, and Shibi walked silently while nodding to Kurenai. All right, Yamanaka.san, can we start this now that we're all free? The Yamanaka sighed in response to Kiba's agitated statement. My name is Saijin, but I would prefer that you not use my given or last name. If you have to talk, a doctor will do. Saijin's level response reminded Kurenai of her bug-loving student, and she idly wondered if he was a lost baby who could have just bleached his hair. Saijin sadly remarked, and I am a pure-blooded Yamanaka, not related to the isolationist Aburame, Junin Yuhi. Although I will admit I prefer their company over my own clan. Kurenai missed the brief smile because she was blushing from being exposed. Even though everything here is fascinating, is it possible for us to return to Sakura-chan, ya? Dr. San. Kiba complained, and after the blonde gave him a deadpan look, he started talking. He sighed again as he saw the blank expressions. More simply put, some crucial part of her character was broken. Genin Haruno is suffering a psychotic break, most likely as a result of some intense mentally jarring event. She no longer reacts to outside stimuli and has become withdrawn, as you can see. Actually, she answers, just not in a visible manner. Kurenai understood him better than the two men, but she didn't fully grasp what he was saying. Her brain still works, and processes all the information her body would normally receive from the world around her. She just can't respond, he said, growling at the three men's blank expressions. Could you help by drawing a comparison? Kurenai asked reluctantly so as not to annoy the doctor, but she could understand what it was like to be trying to explain something that you thought was simple, which might as well be the work and functionality that the Fourth's flying thunder god jutsu involved, even if it was his job. Well, I guess so. May I use you as an example, Genin Aburame? The aforementioned genin merely raised one eyebrow in response to Saijin's question, but it seemed to be sufficient because the Yamanaka approached his bedside. In combat, the Aburame employ insects, which use their bodies as living hives, so to speak. Was it Shino, or would it be like bugs entering? He continued after getting the nod of assent. Bugs entering young Shino. San's body but doing nothing at all, just sitting there living and dying without ever doing anything because Shino. San's body refused to fulfill its fundamental function. He remarked as he made his way back to Sakura's bedside. Haruno.san is basically stuck inside her own head and can't get out yet. As I previously stated, the issue is that her character is currently damaged. By this, I mean that some essential aspect of her was refuted. It would be similar to raising an Inuzuka with his Ninken partner for years before the dog either passed away or turned on his partner and attacked them. Do you get it, Inuzuka.san? He nodded in the assent, and he knew it without having to look at the young man. Now, young Haruno.san is fortunate because, in contrast to when an Inuzuka loses their Ninken partner, she can, in a sense, find a replacement. In due time, she will start to reawaken to the world around her. When Saijin tried to explain the diagnosis in a way that Team 8 could comprehend, he hemmed a lot. To put it simply, she's comatose right now, and for I don't know how long, until she can find something to replace the part of her psychosis that was broken. Now, Junin Yuhi.san, it's your turn. I recently went to see a Rock Lee genin who was hurt during the preliminary round. Even without taking into account that he will never be able to use his arm again, the likelihood of him ever returning to his shinobi career is extremely slim. He might be able to work in a different division of the shinobi corps if he had the capacity to channel chakra. Saijin began, but Kiba interrupted. How is this related to Kurenai? Sensei or Sakura? Inuzuka, who was easily influenced, asked. Without missing a beat, Saijin answered, I'm getting there, and continued his explanation. Genin Lee's psychosis was fundamentally based on his ability to be a shinobi, so when I told him that he was no longer able to be one, this is something like what I expected, but as I think you saw, he was here today as if nothing were wrong. He actually recovered at one of the quickest rates I've ever seen. But as you can see, the outcome deviated from expectations in these circumstances. If this were to happen to Yuhi.san, you might anticipate that she would abandon genjutsu completely as a waste of time and adopt the style of Rock Lee or his sensei, putting all of her energy into taijutsu while sporting a tight green jumpsuit. With his hands reaching into his coat pockets, Saijin explained, what I'm saying is, the Haruno you knew, will almost certainly not be the one that frees herself from this nightmare she's entrapped inside. He threw back his head and began to walk away, pulling his coat tighter around him. What kind of changes can we anticipate, Dr. San? Hold on. Shino surprised his sensei and teammate by asking. It all depends on how important the damaged part was to her identity. Using my previous example, Inuzuka.san may not be able to replicate his clan jutsu, or he may develop cynophobia, or an extreme fear of dogs, which would be crippling for a clan that is so involved with dogs, depending on how long the relationship between him and his Ninken was allowed to develop. He turned to go again, but Kiba stopped him this time. On occasion, I've seen those who also suffered physical changes, although most are fixable with therapy, which she would go through anyway, he said. How do the physical changes look? As if she might change color or develop, I don't know, gills? He asked anxiously, and Saijin shook his head and laughed for the first time. No, nothing that drastic, though I have personally served a woman whose hair turned a stunning violet color. That has been the most startling change, but I won't reveal her name due to confidentiality concerns. Returning to the topic at hand, she might become mute, lose her ability to hear, or switch dominant hands. He turned back as he approached the door, but he said, oh, I just remembered, I had a patient once that reported an increase in body hair, and we never did fix that one either. He then left, his face returning to its even and expressionless business mask. When I last saw her, she resembled your puppy a lot. He laughed at Kiba's stunned expression and turned to go. But after being reassured that the doctor had left, Kiba turned to face his female teammate with a dejected expression. Sakura, I swear to you that I will exact revenge and hold that Uchiha jerk accountable. I promise that neither you nor Shino nor Kurenai Sensei will ever experience anything similar again. Alpha dogs defend their pack, and I am one of them. As he collapsed into the seat between Shino's and Sakura's beds, Kiba yelled in his head and clenched his fist. Kurenai was about to follow his lead when she heard a gentle knock on the open door and turned to see Asuma, the son of the Hokage, holding a small square object wrapped in a velvet cloth. Yes, may we be of assistance? She said, I think I know how I felt about a guy. She had no time for another lengthy confession from a man, even if he was the fellow Junin that Enko had made fun of. Yes, I went to my dad's office and brought this so that all of the children who are still confined to this gloomy place can witness the last battle. Asuma explained, removing the cover from the globe that rested on a pillow like a giant pearl and wasn't square or cuboid in any way. I thought it would lighten the place and help them forget about losing. Kurenai said, okay, so long as it's quiet and doesn't disturb anyone. The Junin couple was seated on the couch, and neither of them commented on the electric sensation that passed through them as their hands touched. A tiny bit of chakra was used to project the image into the air, and everyone started to sit up in their ward beds, thrilled to be able to watch at least one of the fights, and the finale at that. Will Hyuga Hinata, Uchiha Sasuke, and Uzumaki Naruto, the three genin, please make it to the field for this year's Chunin exam's final match? As people started to pour back into the arena after taking advantage of the opportunity to use the facilities, get food and drinks, or collect their bets, Genma made a loud announcement. Sasuke came next in a shushin with a superior smirk on his face, followed by Naruto, who descended from above and landed in an easy crouch. Hinata came last, using the stairs normally as she nervously pressed her fingers together while glancing between the Uzumaki and Uchiha, who were glaring at each other. When Naruto noticed her, he gave her a gentle smile and a thumbs up. Genma paused as the three nodded in unison as they assumed their ready stances. If the three of you are ready, he said, then may the final match begin. He shouted, launching himself back as Sasuke lunged at Naruto, but Hinata stopped him, and the blonde fled into the trees. What, Naruto, are you going to force me to fight your girlfriend rather than you? Ignoring the jab, Naruto started assembling small branches into a pile. Fine with me. This will be a good warm up before I beat you back into your place in last place, Sasuke said. Sasuke's win as Rookie of the Year wasn't for nothing, though, as he used Hinata's whip to cross kunai before kicking her in the stomach with a straight kick that sent her sliding back as he leapt back, creating space between the dojutsu airs. He then pulled out multiple kunai and whipped them at Hinata, who dodged them with ease before he threw a huge fireball at her, forcing her to dive to the side as she lost sight of the Uchiha. Though the girl had to avoid most of the projectiles, Naruto saw Sasuke racing around the arena's ring, peppering Hinata with kunai and shuriken. Naruto intervened when Sasuke aimed one at the base of Hinata's brainstem, exactly in her blind spot, and he appeared next to her, snapping his fingers as a tiny explosion knocked the metal tool away. Apparently, chivalry is still around. Sasuke trailed off before chuckling ominously, but why would you help her when she could have easily dodged that kunai unless it makes sense that a weaker dojutsu would be weak. The all-seeing eyes do have a blind spot, though, as he cautiously followed the Hyuga. Sasuke paused to give his blonde teammate a menacing glare, but neither of his teammates noticed the hate in his words. Naruto frowned and bit his lip before shrugging off his coat and tossing it to Hinata, who gave him a perplexed look. Naruto-kun, stick to the plan. Hinata reprimanded him. If you're going to fight him, you'll need it more than I do. Naruto explained, it's fire resistant, so it should give you enough time in a pinch, and then he leapt away as Hinata continued to fight the haughty Uchiha. Naruto didn't have to look to see that she was grinning as she pulled the cloak over her top, the bottom brushing the ground because of her diminutive size. As she slid into her Juken stance, Hinata glared at the Uchiha with her Byakugan activate, adding to the intimidation as Sasuke scoffed and fled as Hinata turned quickly and deflected the kunai with her palm. Hinata cried out, it'll take more than a blind spot to beat me, Uchiha. Especially when you're that predictable. Sasuke snarled and charged the brunette who had sparred with him in taijutsu. If the circumstances had been different, Naruto would have laughed at the haughty Uchiha for using a skilled Hyuga in taijutsu. The Hyuga heiress struggled to strike him, but Sasuke knew that she only needed one blow, so he had his own eyes that allowed him to track her hands and dodge with his superior speed. He knocked her hands away, hammering her chest with a snap kick, which she took with a girlish grunt, rolling back as she landed on her feet, her hand already gripping her favorite weapon to keep the raven-haired boy away. Her whip had no such issues, coming at him from any direction, and she interspersed it with several shuriken thrown by her spare hand. A part of her Juken training required her to train equally with both hands, which resulted in most, if not all, Hyugas being ambidextrous. Hinata showed off this ability as she watched him follow her hands and switched accordingly without missing a beat. Her hands were trackable because, regardless of her skill, she was slower than him and her body was still limited to the human body's bounds. After a while, Sasuke gave in and let her strike him with the whip, biting back a cry when it pierced his forearm. He quickly wrapped the weapon around his arm, pushing the barbs in deeper but yanking hard, which pulled Hinata straight at him. He was able to hit her with multiple shuriken as she flew at him, then knee her in her bleeding chest and chop her in the throat, doubling the girl over as he vaulted over her and removing a tanto from his arm. Warmer that was splattered with blood from the barbed whip. Then, abruptly, Naruto replaced the injured Hyuga as he turned on his heel to face the Uchiha, but he saw nothing before a sharp pain shot through his side as he looked back to see a kunai sticking from his left lung, staining the metal in his mesh shirt with blood as he stared in shock into his rival's smirking eyes. Behind him, he felt his vision shift, like a haze rising, as he saw an unharmed Hinata staring at him bewildered. "Dobi, you're still terrible at genjutsu. I just hit you with a genjutsu earlier to give you the impression that I was going to kill your girlfriend because I knew you wouldn't be able to resist jumping in to save her. However, it appears that you will be the one to bite it," as he kicked Naruto in the chin, causing blood to flow from his mouth. Sasuke yelled and twisted the kunai, pulling it out as he fell backwards and landing on his hands. Why couldn't Sasuke be arrogant enough to not train over the break? It felt like Hinata had tackled him, all focused on his now fractured ribs as he yelled and was sent rocketing back towards the ground. Sasuke flipped over and flew after the airborne blonde, shadowing him as he kicked at his right side as Naruto dodged, but he regretted it seconds later as Sasuke used it to attack from the other side even harder, landing the kick right on Naruto's injured side as the Jinchuriki felt his ribs crack from the impact. Sasuke wasn't finished, though, because he turned to face the falling blonde, whose eyes darted as he saw Sasuke perform a brief series of hand seals and recognized them. "I hope you enjoy my new jutsu. It didn't feel complete before." Taking a deep breath, Sasuke screamed, "Lion's roaring barrage." Hinata shouted his name as she ran in his direction, and the blonde exhaled as a huge ball of fire engulfed him as he fell to the ground. She said, "I guess you'd pull something like this, Sasuke, but I have to say, thanks," as she saw a blackened figure rise and roll his neck. With a snarl, Naruto walked out of the flames, embers floating around his body as he sighed contentedly. However, he was taken by surprise when a blue bullet sped down and knocked him to the ground. As he dodged the speeding fireballs that seemed to follow him, he had to automatically grab the happy Hyuga in a bridal carry, but Hinata's tackles still made his ribs want to give out. "No fucking way. Fire style, Grand Phoenix Flower Jutsu." Sasuke roared, advancing through the fastest set of hand seals yet, as Naruto remarked with a hint of interest. A second set of fireballs peppered the ground around Naruto as he leapt through the flames innocuously, sliding across the ground as he landed behind a large boulder, dropping his vulnerable girlfriend. A series of fireballs the size of Naruto's torso raced to the blonde, who leapt up and leapt away as they crashed into the ground. "How did you?" "I didn't." As she activated her eyes, Hinata had to deactivate them when Sasuke began hurling enormous fireballs of chakra around. Hinata stammered, and Naruto grinned, pointing to her eyes and tracing his hand down his body. "You didn't tell me that you could absorb the chakra from fire style attacks, did you?" As Naruto sheepishly rubbed the back of his head, Hinata made the accusation. He opened his mouth to say, "Well," but Hinata stopped him with her own lips, gazing intently into his cerulean pools. "Naru-kun, don't do that ever again or you'll lose your privilege." The heiress gave the order, and Naruto nodded, his face flushed scarlet as the two genins' focus was captured by the massive boulder that cracked and then broke as Sasuke fell between them as they leapt apart. As soon as Sasuke turned to follow Naruto, Hinata reacted by putting her whip around his ankle and yanking him off his feet in her direction. She then used a Juken strike to hit him, but he quickly replaced it with a log, which was destroyed as Hinata's Byakugan eyes scanned the field for her target. As she sprinted at the blonde, she discovered him running at Naruto's bare back. She didn't anticipate him abruptly turning to face her, though, as he sprinted through a series of seals. He leapt at her, grabbing her wrist and kicking her in the face, sending her reeling back as he used the momentum to flip into the air. He threw multiple kunai at the brunette, who escaped any critical hits, though one kunai cut her arm as she applied pressure to the wound. "A few more seconds, please." The real Naruto was in a meditative stance when he felt his chakra being called upon, so he thought as he pushed more chakra into his flames, which turned yellow from their orange-red color. Hinata was at a loss for tactics against the adaptable Uchiha, who attacked her once more as they resumed their taijutsu battle. This time, however, he was prepared, drawing out his tanto and holding it in a reverse grip as he zipped under her whip, cutting off her reach as he swiped across her bare stomach, the brunette barely bouncing back in time before he raised his hand and spit out a fireball at her as she crossed her arms. Sasuke had foreseen this and had cut the chakra to his attack, rushing through the flames and attacking Naruto with his tanto, now in a forward grip, as Naruto blocked with his kunai, barely holding back the Uchiha. However, she abruptly disappeared in a plume of smoke as Naruto replaced her once more. Both boys crouched down and raced at each other as they appeared in the center, sparks flying as they clashed in a quick series of strikes before crossing because neither could back down without suffering a serious wound. Eventually, Naruto was able to push him back while Sasuke held his Tonto forward in a challenge. Dobi, you are aware that the blade with the longer reach will always prevail in a fight between two blades of equal strength, he said as he deflected the blade downward, cutting Naruto across the cheek and taking a long cut down his forearm. He then stabbed Naruto's shoulder with his Tonto before kicking him away as the blonde's ribs cracked and the raven-haired boy heard it. Naruto smirked through the pain as he disappeared in a plume of smoke, revealing an injured Hinata. Hinata swung her whip in a wide arc, wrapping it around Sasuke's neck as she pulled it tightly, choking him as he dropped his sword. To think the great Sasuke Uchiha would fall for a simple henge, how shameful. Hinata said as Sasuke only saw red, grabbing the leather portion of the whip as he attempted to spit fire at her, but she smirked even more as he tried to spit fire at her. The conductive metal thread that runs through my whip enables it to absorb the properties of my chakra. After Hinata said, that means that I can cut off your chakra simply by wrapping my whip around you. Sasuke growled and tightened his hold while performing a ram hand seal. As if I would lose to a weakling like you, he said. Kai. The Hyuga saw her life flash before her eyes as he swung down faster than she could react, only to hear the telltale clang of metal on metal as she saw Naruto in front of her. Hinata scowled as she watched his body start to be covered by his curse seal as he began drawing her closer as he swung his sword at the Hyuga wildly. As his strength increased, she had to let him go or risk being drawn into range of the Uchiha's wild attacks. The blonde said, I'm ready now, Hinata. Chan. He held Sasuke back, but his arm trembled as the Uchiha's power was hardly contained. Hinata nodded reluctantly and leapt away as Naruto looked into his male teammate's bright red eyes. Oh no, I will not allow her to escape so easily. Dobi, I'm going to beat you. Then restrain her and cut her throat while you look on helplessly. The dojutsu heir grabbed Naruto's wrist and flipped him over in a judo flip, but then hammered his chest with a snap kick that sent Naruto skidding across the ground. Sasuke growled as the curse seal completely encased him and his strength surged. No, I'm going to beat you with my own power, Naruto said, taking deep breaths as Sasuke flew through hand seals and forced his curse seal to recede. But maybe I'll let you off with a light beating if you give me that move you used to defeat the kid from Suna. Sasuke said in a tone that made Naruto want to slap him. I don't need this much power to squash a pest, the Uchiha said overconfidently as Naruto breathed heavily and rubbed his fractured ribs as the two glared across the arena. Naruto mocked Sasuke as he growled, you couldn't do it even if I did deem you worthy enough for me to use. Sasuke said, just do it and we'll see. Naruto grinned, his back to the still smoking foliage, and the two circled. When I get serious, I don't use fire release. Scorch release, a Kenkai Genkai that blends fire and wind releases, is what I use. However, my abilities go far beyond that. Equal amounts of fire and wind chakra are used in Scorch release. But if I overload it with fire chakra, Naruto trailed off, raising his fingers and snapping them once as a huge explosion engulfed the entire treescape behind him. As Naruto laughed, Sasuke smirked and snapped his own fingers in confusion, but nothing happened. He said simply, Snapdragon display. You see, if I wanted you to, you couldn't imitate my moves. After stealing everyone's best moves, I'm left wondering if any of you Uchiha are truly strong or if that is just fake bravado. Sasuke growled and raced at the blonde, snapping his fingers quickly. The arena was engulfed in explosions as Sasuke dodged like a fly and reached Naruto unharmed, grinning viciously and slashing down as Naruto stopped his Tonto downward cut, causing the kunai to crack under the pressure created. A Uchiha is too strong for you little trick to defeat. You need two hands for that huge fire attack, and your best can't even come close to beating me. You can't defeat me as long as I'm around you, face it. Knowing that Naruto was barely holding back the stronger blade, Sasuke said as the crowd started to mutter. You should have that checked out, Sasuke. Premature attacking is a serious issue. As he held the kunai up with one hand, strengthening the limb with chakra, Naruto remarked, if you'd bothered to let me finish, I was going to say that I naturally have a better affinity for wind than fire, so you haven't even seen me in my element. The kunai started to crack more. He held a sword longer than Sasuke's Tonto but not as long as a katana, and as he held his hand out, the fires behind him responded, the ash floating in the air coming at his command to stick together as a blade began to form, an ashen white, considering its makeup. Naruto smirked as his sword broke apart, forming multiple small blades that tore apart the haughty Uchiha's shirt. He then replaced it with a log, which was reduced to kindling in a matter of seconds as Naruto walked forwards, a small flame burning the splinters as more ash responded to his call as his ash blade reformed. Ash release. Naruto whispered as he swung at Sasuke, who dodged back needlessly. Hinata yelled, "To the left Naruto!" Naruto smirked and ran at Sasuke, who gritted his teeth as he crossed blades with him. Although the Uchiha's eyes helped him track Naruto's attacks, they didn't help him hit the blonde who had taken several lessons with Hayate, Konoha's best swordsman, during the break, which allowed him to keep up with Sasuke. Sasuke didn't pull any punches, so he actually kicked at Naruto, who leapt over the kick and swung down as Sasuke thrust straight at Naruto's sword, knocking it away. Both of them paused for a moment before charging at each other again, with Naruto using the momentum as his sword bounced off to spin and coming in with a powerful slash across Sasuke's side, which he had to block or suffer the incapacitating cut. Nevertheless, Naruto pinned his blade against his body and used his opposing leg to hammer the raven-haired Genin's ribs with a powerful kick that caused him to cough up blood. When Hinata entered the fight, Sasuke managed to push through the pain and grab Naruto's raised leg, head-butting the blonde as both boys reeled from the blow. Sasuke recovered first, doubling Naruto over with a powerful knee to the chin as he raised his sword to finish the job, only to be caught off guard as a barbed whip swept over his back, tearing into his chest as the barb's blood coated them as they were pulled away. Sasuke watched her intently as Naruto recovered, slashing at his feet as he stomped the blade down, only to yell as he jumped up, Hinata's whip encircling his waist as she pulled him in, Naruto aiming for his shoulder as he was replaced by a log that disintegrated upon touching Naruto's blade. She had used her boyfriend's back as a springboard and struck at him with a Juken palm, which he blocked with the flat of his blade as Hinata backed off. Sasuke didn't slow down, though, as he came from behind Hinata and kicked her into the air, sweeping her feet out from under her. Instead of following her, he blocked Naruto's swing, using his other hand to pull a kunai out as he stabbed the blonde's hand, forcing him to drop his sword. Sasuke smirked and scooped it up, only to yell as he dropped the blade, nursing his blistered hand, allowing Naruto to catch his blade as he spun on the ball of his foot, slicing the Uchiha across his back, right shoulder to left hip, as the Genin let out a silent scream. However, it wasn't over, as Hinata rolled in mid-air, pulling her whip after her as it caught Sasuke under the chin, pulling him up slightly as Naruto finished it off with an axe kick to his bruised ribs. "Why did you think it was a good idea to grab my blade, which is made of still burning ashes? Its ability to burn anything it comes into contact with is what gives it its true power." As he summoned more ash to form a ring around his wrist that connected to the blade, giving the impression that it had grown directly from his arm, Naruto remarked, "Even but I'm immune to fire-based heat and burns." Genma began, "It looks like we have our first castle." But Sasuke barely got to his feet, dripping blood from his mouth, his shirt gone, burned off to make more ash for Naruto's sword. "I can't lose in this situation. I'm not going to lose here. I will not let the dead last." With a howl, Sasuke clenched his fists and disappeared in a flash of speed, hammering Hinata with a kick so strong that she fell to the ground. The curse seal took over his entire body. Naruto started, only for Sasuke to look at him as he sprinted across the ground, sliding under Naruto as he erupted upwards, sending Naruto skyward as he raced up the arena wall before leaping off at the blonde, who had enough sense to send fire out of his feet as he hovered in the air, managing to cross blades in Sasuke in mid-air. However, Sasuke abandoned his sword as he grabbed Naruto's throat, trying to choke him out as Naruto flipped them over, slamming his sword down as Sasuke was sent rocketing into the ground. Just for good measure, Naruto sent his ash blade after him like an arrow as it almost reached Sasuke before it turned back into ash as it flew back to Naruto, who caught it as it reformed into a blade mid-swing as he rolled to block a descending Sasuke's sword. But the boy's strength was much higher now as Naruto was sent flying into the ground beside Hinata, both Genin breathing heavily as they leaned on each other as they met the four eyes staring them down evilly. "Which is the authentic one?" As Naruto scowled, Hinata inquired worriedly. "They both have identical chakra pathways." Before Hinata put a hand on his shoulder and the genjutsu broke apart just in time for Naruto to catch the final hand seal Sasuke created. One he knew very well, he muttered, "Now I know that's not a genjutsu if Hinata-chan can see them." Really, Sasuke's shadow clone's jutsu is so powerful that the world can hardly manage one Sasuke's ego. How will it manage this many? As all of the Sasukes snarled and surrounded the Genin couple who were standing back, Naruto said cynically. With his ash sword dispelling, Naruto said, "I didn't think we'd have to use it yet, but it looks like we have no choice." Behind him, Hinata assumed her Juken stance. "What are you doing?" Sasuke inquired from outside the circle as Naruto and Hinata exchanged a faint smile and an imperceptible look. As Hinata smoothly activated her Byakugan and Naruto knocked down his headband, They all said in unison, "Welcome to our battlefield, where we opened our eyes and perfected our sight." Hinata uttered the words, 8 trigrams, while the Sasuke group hunkered down. Naruto uttered the words, "Flame Dance," as the Sasuke group charged. As they launched their assault, they uttered the phrase, "Dance of the Gentle Twin Flames," in stereo once more. Hinata began by placing a straight palm to a clone's chest, and Naruto mimicked her attack as 2 clones disappeared. Both genin then swung their weapons as a wave of ash destroyed several clones, and Hinata's whip destroyed a few more as the pair returned to their initial stance. After that, things really picked up speed as Hinata launched into the 64 palms attack, and Naruto mirrored her blows with tiny bursts of flame, defeating Sasuke's army. Since Naruto couldn't block all directions at once, the remaining 10 clones got smart to their attacks and backed off, keeping their distance as the couple smirked, both of them sensing the attacks coming. 6 of the clones ran through a quick series of hand seals, sending a massive fireball into the center of the circle with the intention of burning Hinata. The Hyuga didn't react, so she arced back as Naruto went skyward, and the Hyuga gave a faint smile, but no one could see her inside the Firenado. However, no one anticipated Hinata bending down as Naruto rolled onto her back before spinning like a top upside down, with fire leaking from his feet. Hinata thought, "You've helped me again, Ka-chan." She stuck her hands into the descending Firenado, spinning like the Kaden, her chakra covered hands pushing outwards as the fire started to form a shell around her. Then she pulsed her chakra in a perfect ring around her as a white ring of fire pulsed out as she began repeating it quickly, catching the Sasuke clones off guard as the surprise attack destroyed most of them. Finally, Hinata stopped spinning. She uttered the words, 8 trigrams, heavenly ring. Naruto landed on her back, his spinning slowing to a minimum. As he flipped over his girlfriend's back to block a Sasuke clone's sword strike, Naruto yelled, "Scorch style. Dragon Twister." His sword returned to him in a matter of seconds after he parried the clone's blade up and swung low, slicing the clone across his gut before he disappeared in a puff of smoke. Knowing that many shadow clones had temporarily depleted his seal, Naruto taunted, "It would appear your little power boost didn't hold up too long." His 2 surviving clones ran at him, snorting and briefly disappearing as he crossed blades with the real Sasuke, who hung back. "Can you manage the Raf, please?" As the twin Sasuke clones approached her, Hinata grinned and bowed while she cracked her whip. Naruto said this in a phony noble voice, and as she did so, one of the clones leapt over it, and the other tried to stop it with his blade, but her whip wrapped around it and she yanked it back towards her, leaving the clone without a weapon. Though the second clone offered cover by throwing shuriken at the distracted Bluenet, Hinata simply smacked the projectiles away with her whip while still using her eyes to watch for the more dangerous of the 2 clones. The battle was not over, though, as the still equipped clone charged her, trying to get inside her guard as she jumped back, not letting him in as her whip snaked out to wrap around the clone's neck only for him to disappear in a sudden burst of speed. As he drew out a Fuma Shuriken, the weaponless clone became enraged and reached into the pack on his back. He took careful aim and charged Hinata, who ignored him and leapt over the clone, using his back as a springboard to jump higher into the air. She also used her Juken training to hit the base of his brainstem, her chakra cutting off the nervous system as he dispelled a second later. Her eyes widened as she was caught in mid-air, unable to dodge, and the second clone reappeared just as she was about to smirk, intending to decapitate her. The clone descended after her as she frantically tried to come up with a quick plan, then used her whip to snag the fallen Fuma Shuriken as she pulled it towards her. "Now, wouldn't a Byakugan be nice?" With a startled expression, she twisted her body and asked rhetorically, the Fuma Shuriken still slicing across her side before continuing past her and piercing the clone's chest before disappearing. She landed with a self-assured smile that turned to a wince as she sat down and watched Naruto finish up with Sasuke while holding her bleeding side. Sasuke could hardly keep up with Naruto's unrelenting swordplay when he felt his final 2 clones dispelling, filling him with their extra chakra as he gasped for air, and pushing away from Naruto, who appeared to be healing more quickly than Sasuke despite his bleeding. When Naruto saw that Sasuke was slowing down, he felt the primal thrill of superiority and jumped back, holding his sword out as he made a ram seal with one hand. He turned tail and started running towards the arena's edge, with Sasuke foolishly chasing after him and calling taunts. As he jumped as high into the air as he could, he hit the wall and ran straight up it, forcing Sasuke to look away and his eyes tracking until he floated in front of the midday sun. Sasuke had no time to react when Naruto appeared behind him with a trail of scorched earth, and he fell to his knees in defeat. Solar, Naruto began as he flew down, landing on the ground as he released a burst of fire from his feet as he flew at Sasuke. Eclipse. He closed his eyes and held himself up with a hand on his knees. He felt Sasuke rise behind him, attempting to attack Naruto's back, but the blonde turned around and stopped his blade with his still.in.use sword. The sudden attack caught Naruto off guard, and Sasuke gave him a resolute look. Naruto gulped once at Sasuke's manic glare before falling to the ground with his blade against his neck. The Uchiha heir went limp as he crumpled to the ground, with a clone of Naruto standing behind him, holding a simple bar of ash. "Who used the shadow clones first?" Naruto said, breathing heavily as he stood to his feet. "Don't forget," he strained, Sasuke's curse seal slowly growing again, having finally recharged as Naruto gritted his teeth, using all his strength to hold Sasuke back. Hesitantly, Genma leapt down and watched the defeated Uchiha as he took his pulse. Then, he stood with his arm raised, channeling chakra to his vocal cords and shouting into the stands. "Sasuke Uchiha is unconscious. He has been disqualified. Naruto Uzumaki and Hinata Hyuga are the two finalists." When it became apparent that the renowned Uchiha had lost, the audience fell momentarily silent. Genma leapt away, the blonde and brunette facing each other, each holding their wounds gingerly, and Naruto and Hinata had time to catch their breath as Medic.Nin hurried across the field, loading Sasuke onto a stretcher and disappearing in no more than 5 minutes. Naruto, laughing through labored breathing, remarked, "Looks like it's just you and me, Hina-chan." Hinata gave him a dejected nod before slowly raising her hand. "Yes, I suppose so. Proctor." The Hyuga heiress looked at Naruto in shock, but her next words were interrupted when Naruto leapt at her, forcing her to dodge. Hinata gasped and clutched her whip as Naruto assumed a taijutsu stance, taunting, "If you think I'm just going to let you forfeit, then you don't know me as well as I thought." Hinata said quietly, "But I don't want to fight you, Naru-kun." Naruto gave her a kind look and eased his stance as he approached her. Before he smirked and leaned in close to whisper into her ear, his breath tickling her as she sighed, Naruto said, "I don't either, but we've both come too far to simply forfeit. Besides, if you win, then," he said, his voice growing quieter as Hinata listened intently, blushing profusely as he pulled away, jumping back to his starting position. Hinata confidently said, "Okay, Naru-kun, I will do it." She assumed her own fighting stance while her boyfriend grinned and knelt down, both of them closely observing each other. In response to Hinata's attack, Naruto whispered, blushing softly, "Good, because I'm not going to let you win that easily, Hina. Heim." He jumped in a feint, flipping over the whip as Hinata threw several kunai at the airborne blonde, who then replaced it with a log that exploded moments later, blocking Hinata's vision as she activated her Byakugan seamlessly and catching multiple chakra signals racing through the smoke. She calmly breathed and ducked under the first one who attempted to hit with a sweeping kick, dispelling him with a single palm to the chest, but the next two quickly pushed her back, attacking with a feint, then rolling through a quick set of seals and spitting small speeding fireballs at the brunette, who smirked as she spun around, swatting the flames away with his offered cloak. This had the unintended consequence of obstructing the clones' vision as she leapt over them, landing on their backs as she pushed off, dispelling the twin clones at the same time, before she swept his feet out from under him. She barely escaped the flames that licked at her clothing because Naruto was ready when he landed on his hands and struck her in the side with a powerful windmill kick. His cloak fluttered in the wind as she slid to a stop. But as he flew at her, aiming for his midsection with a chakra-infused palm, Hinata used her whip like a tether, yanking his hand out from under as he did so. He grunted in pain and adjusted himself mid-flight as her attack struck his thigh before he could replace it with a log, which Hinata sent flying with her whip as it exploded. Naruto leapt from the smoke as his paramour effortlessly slid into her Juken stance, catching his sweeping kick with her palm, pushing it away, then hammering his leg with several more jabs as he collapsed, his leg limp. However, he was adamant about continuing, and as she leaned sideways to avoid him, he threw a kunai at her head. However, he realized too late that it was a feint, and he grabbed his oversized cloak, pulling her to the ground and pinning her to the ground with a kunai to her neck. "Nice fight, but keep in mind that I know how you fight. You lose," he said sweetly as Hinata's blush increased as she noticed their positions and had an epiphany. "Sorry, Naru-kun," she said, confusing the blonde until she pushed him down with her legs and kissed him passionately as he moved the kunai to protect himself and her. But she took advantage of his lack of defense and hammered her knee into his fractured ribs, using his hiss of pain to pull a kunai from his pouch as she stabbed it into his pelvic bone, sending Naruto leaping back as he covered his crotch while Hinata climbed to her feet, her whip snapping in the air. "That's how you could have castrated me," he spoke solemnly as Hinata tried to suppress her guilt by putting herself in a ready stance. Naruto's fake surprise turned into a real smile as he knelt down and threw the bloody kunai at her after she swatted it out of the air with her whip. However, Naruto smirked as Hinata heard the sound of an explosion tag and saw the attached tag burning away. As she was rocked by the near explosion, she did the first thing she could think of, curling into the fetal position and covering herself with the cloak. The nature of the explosion even forced her to disable her Byakugan eyes, but Naruto's surprise snap kick sent her reeling away as she stared at the blonde, her ears ringing as she stood, only to discover that her offered whip was gone, blown away by the explosion. Reactivating her eyes, Naruto crossed his arms, and several baseball-sized fireballs appeared around him as he raised a single eyebrow in challenge as the fireballs struck her. Scorch style, Crimson Swarm, he said simply, as Hinata covered herself with the cloak as they peppered her back. Then, as the fireballs swirled around her, Naruto removed one hand and swirled his hand as he rolled idly through seals, breathing out a stream of air that joined with the small fireballs to create a whirlpool of fire around her as the heat started to affect her. Her breath came short as she launched a last ditch attack, bursting from the fire as it licked at her exposed skin, catching Naruto off guard as she landed in front of his helpless form, striking him swiftly and precisely. She gasped as Naruto flung himself back, landing in a heap on the ground. He laughed and then attempted to stand, but his limbs were unresponsive and he felt nothing. 8 trigrams, 4 palm binding. As Naruto gritted his teeth and tried to use the Biju's Yuki to heal his sealed nerves, Kyuubi taunted him, saying, "Haha, it seems you got a vixen with spunk." Kyuubi then gave Naruto a low growl and said, "Now how about you put her in her place, and show her who the alpha is in your relationship. Now stop talking. I don't need your assistance." Kyuubi remained silent for a short while before Naruto mentally answered. Kyuubi's tone made Naruto's blood boil. "Oh, how I wish that were true, then I may actually consider killing you now, but no, you're too weak to beat your pretty little vixen. Or is it because she will truly be able to tell the difference between my pure Yuki and that fake imitation you fleshbags call chakra that you don't want to use my power on your vixen? You fear that, like the rest of this Kami-forsaken village, she will hate you because she will believe you to be a large, evil demon." As Naruto's blood immediately leapt to an overflowing pot of rage, Kyuubi remarked, "It's okay, just let me take the reins for a little while. I bet she tastes heavenly, her nubile. Stop talking. I swear to whatever deity or Akuma is listening, if you don't stay away from her, I'll rip my own heart out and drag you down to the lowest pit of hell with me." As Kyuubi grinned, Naruto growled. He used the blonde's intense hatred to send a pulse through his body, unsealing his limbs and giving him a small chakra boost. Kyuubi curled up, his orange fur almost glowing with his joy, feeling the mental connection close as fast as it had opened. "As if I'm afraid of your insignificant threats, still, I didn't anticipate so much unreleased anger and hatred." As he closed his eyes and reveled in the sensations of the outside world, Kyuubi thought to himself, "Oh yes, our fight will be glorious, and when I consume your soul, I will be unchallenged on this plane." Naruto forced himself to breathe heavily, and Hinata mirrored him, their gazes reflecting their mutual understanding. "This is the final attack. If I want to win, I'll have to give it my all." Across from him, Hinata activated her eyes one last time, calming her nerves as she felt her chakra cover her palm as it glowed slightly from the gathered chakra. At the same time, they sprinted towards the other, their eyes full of determination. The medical ward and the cage box were silent as they watched Naruto put his one hand back, holding his wrist steady as it shook from his exhaustion. Grand Force Palm. 8 trigrams. Hinata yelled. I would never think of using this technique on anyone other than her Naruto-kun, who was actually able to avoid its effects, or someone she really detested. Blistering Bomb. If Hinata was prepared to use her strongest attack, Naruto could finally treat her with the same decency, he shouted as it glowed with an ethereal white light. As the two got closer, time seemed to slow down. Then she thrust her palm forward, and Naruto hit it with his ball of explosive gas. Time froze for a second, and then there was a huge explosion that shattered the crowd's silence. Both genin flew back, bouncing across the ground before colliding with the walls with enough force to leave dents in the stone as they crumpled to the ground. Genma fell to the ground and looked from one to the other before projecting his voice and directing chakra to his vocal cords. When he said, "Since both competitors are unconscious, this match is," a loud roar interrupted him. "Look, he's on the move," Lee shouted at the top of his lungs, only to be countered by an even louder cry of, "So is Oni Chan." This was the voice of Hanabi Hyuga, who sat down and blushed at all the attention from her father. However, both were right, as Naruto and Hinata slowly stood up, managing to stand weakly while they looked at each other across the vast arena floor and grinned. His vision flickered as he glanced at his girlfriend, grinning because he could see that she was also still standing, as if by sheer willpower, before he heard Genma say, "And it would appear the winner is," and fell to his knees, his momentum carrying him to the ground as he landed on his face, a tiny trickle of blood leaking from the corner of his mouth as he looked to the side, his vision flickering. He could see Genma's mouth moving, and felt the vibration as people cheered, but he closed his eyes wearily, so he couldn't make out what was being said. His vision went black as he pushed them open again and saw a kunai flying in his direction. Naruto rolled over with a groan, his body aching dully, and forced his eyes open to see a sight he was glad to see. It was obvious to him that he was in a hospital bed. The room was so bright that he could hardly open his eyes, and his girlfriend, who was curled up beside him on the bed and squeezing him lightly while drooling from the corner of her mouth on the pillow, seemed unconcerned. Using the wall as support, Naruto staggered out of the room, finding the nurse's station with the medic.nin on duty glaring at him. He carefully created a clone, replacing himself as she whined softly and squeezing the clone tighter. "Why do you get out of bed? I advise you to return to bed right away unless you want me to sedate you because you are still not feeling better after suffering from severe chakra exhaustion." Naruto snorted under his breath and turned away as the medic.nin gave him the order. Returning to the room, he silently repositioned himself in Hinata's grasp as the clone snarled, only to have Naruto snatch it away with force. Accepting that he would have to spend a few more hours in bed, he decided that at least he had a cute girlfriend who was using him as a pillow. He shook off the hand that grabbed his shoulder to steady him, and Sarutobi moaned as he fell into the seat at the head of the table, carefully touching the deep wound on his side that even now was leaking a foul greenish purple liquid that was likely the poison attacking his insides. Looking at the different expressions on the faces of those seated around the table, he grumbled, "I may be nearly 72, but I think I can handle sitting in a chair, bear. That's all this job seems to be these days." As he leaned his new cane against the table, the elderly man reflected, "At least he didn't have time to finish the job, even though I was rusty when Orochimaru attacked me with his sword." The Anbu reached to steady him, but his heated glare stopped him. "Okay, now that I've arrived, let's get this party started," he said, laughing at the odd looks he received from the various shinobi, only to groan as his wound howled in pain at the movement. This meeting was held to talk about the Chunin finals and the promotion of our participating shinobi, as you can probably imagine. We will therefore begin with the people who were eliminated in the first round. "Now, Neji Hyuga," Hiruzen said, allowing the table to be discussed while the various clan heads sat in silence, thinking about the boy. Hiyashi surprised the assembled clan heads by responding first, "I'd have to say no to a promotion." This was surprising because they were talking about his nephew. Shozu said, "I want to say yes. He certainly has the skill and power to handle a higher class of job requests." However, his former blonde teammate shot him down right away. "That's accurate, but we also need to take into account other factors besides skill and power. Neji showed no leadership qualities during his match, and Chunin are expected to lead small squads on missions." Inoichi shot back, and the others nodded. "Besides, if he can't control his temper, sending him off on a higher tier mission, alone or with a team, could get them all killed." "What are your thoughts on the boy, Sume?" The Inuzuka matriarch sighed as she leaned back and idly scratched her nin.ken behind his ear in response to Sarutobi's question. "I concur with Chozu that the boy is undoubtedly skilled enough to complete missions of a higher caliber. Nevertheless, Inoichi makes a good point, and I agree with him." With her nin.ken softly barking in agreement, Sume remarked, "Hiyashi's boy, heir, nephew is no better than a rabid wolf if he doesn't learn to control his temper." I don't want to repeat myself, but I also concur with Inoichi's evaluation. Since I'll be the first to acknowledge that my decisions regarding one of my students have resulted in a similar problem, I feel qualified to state from personal experience that putting Neji Hyuga in charge of a team will either cause him to kill them because he doesn't understand that it's a team for a reason or cause any shinobi he's with to resent him for his arrogant demeanor. Kakashi said, drawing some odd looks from the other group. "Could someone please explain to me why Hitaki is here conducting assessments if we could temporarily halt these discussions?" In an attempt to appease the short-tempered matriarch, Sume growled and Kakashi raised his hands in response. Sasuke-kun is too young and injured to attend such a meeting, so the elders wanted a proxy to be chosen in his place. Sarutobi said, they thought it would be disrespectful if the Uchiha clan didn't have a say in these things. Sume snarled, her nin.ken imitating her movements as he stood, his hackles slightly raised. "Who gives a damn? If he realized that we could, manage this village without his help, perhaps that would knock him down a few pegs." Sume yelled, and Hiruzen nodded in spite of himself. After a brief discussion, They decided against it in favor of saving time trying to find the senseis of the teams or bringing them from either their own or their students' hospital rooms. I agree, that's why Kakashi is only here to discuss things. He won't have a vote, and if you'd prefer, we can bring in the other senseis. The third Hokage made the offer. Returning to the subject at hand, who has remained silent? Shikaku, what are your thoughts on promoting Neji-kun? The head of the Nara clan sat with her hands clasped in front of her face, gazing off into space without responding to the various statements. Shikaku. Sarutobi made another attempt, punctuated this time by a gentle tap of his cane against the statuesque man. Inoichi cleared his throat and leaned closer to his friend's ear, saying, I've got this Hokage. Sama. Shikaku, wake up, Yoshino's here. Shikaku jerked away, staring around with wide eyes as his blonde friend laughed at the Nara's response. Shikaku looked at Sarutobi with soulless eyes and said in a dead voice, I'll get you for this Inoichi. He had run out of things to say. The other shinobi could tell he was still listening as Shikaku sagged down on the table, pretending to sleep. Promoting Neji Hyuga is a bad idea that will only end badly for all involved, he said. Shibi attempted to interrupt, saying, okay, well that's everyone so. Hokage. Sama. If no one has anything else to say. Hokage. Sama. Shibi continued, saying, then Neji Hyuga won't be promoted. Hokage. Sama. And we'll go on to the next person. Hokage. Sama. Shibi said sharply. Shibi yelled, but nobody responded. Sume slapped the back of her hand and said, do you have fleas? As everyone looked around the room because there were no windows. Did someone leave a window open? I'm feeling this breeze. Her partner gave her a low growl in response to her question. A faint murmur was heard, and Sarutobi remarked, moving on. The third added, next we have Shikamaru Nara. Promote him, in my opinion. As the others nodded, Hiyashi remarked, Shikamaru was able to turn his opponent's clan jutsu against him, and the Naras are known for being excellent strategists. As the Yamanaka clan head picked up on the line of reasoning, Kakashi said, yes, but not only that, he used the field to his advantage as well as the senbon left over from the previous match. Not to mention that he forfeited when he realized he didn't have the chakra to continue on in the competition, and allowed his opponent time to rest before the next round, giving him a better chance of getting promoted. The man with the blonde hair said. He may not be able to overpower a higher tier shinobi like some of the other competitors, but as a Nara, he'd be capable of making a plan to beat, or at least restrain, them so his team could finish their mission. Chozu acknowledged, receiving multiple nods of approval. What do you think, Shikaku? The weary Nara sighed, you know him better than the rest of us. I believe he could lead a team on missions with little trouble, and he'll hate me for saying this. Hiruzen nodded, and Shikaku continued, the Chunin exams aren't the easiest place for us to show off our skills because the Nara work better in teams. Thus, Shikamaru Nara's promotion to Chunin is approved. Anyone against it? He posed the question, but nobody answered. I'm not one for all that strategizing stuff, so I'll just take your word, Sume replied. Alright, Narissa Suin is up next. Initial thoughts? His tone was one of inquiry as he spoke. Since nobody seemed to want to speak, Chozu began. Narissa Suin was interesting. Her choice of weapon was unusual and she used it with considerable skill for only being out of the academy for 4 months. So she has my vote. Chozu concluded. Yes, she was skilled with more than one side, but it was a wise move to use them both against a Hyuga. Having said that, she didn't really demonstrate any other abilities. Hiyashi surprised the others by acknowledging a weakness of his clan, even if it was implied rather than stated. So my vote is no, he concluded. She either needs to improve her skill with those sides or broaden the spectrum of her skills. You both make good points, but I'm not sure if it's a good idea to promote her. You heard her remarks regarding the clan status of her opponent. We are essentially implying that it is acceptable to despise the clans if we give her a promotion. That would only cause the village to become divided. With her Nin-Ken whining next to her while he was bitten by multiple fleas, Sume declared, my vote is no for that reason alone. Although that is true, I believe it might be advantageous if we give her a promotion in light of her remarks. If we don't, it might seem that we turned her down because she dislikes clan-born people, but if she is promoted, it might encourage more civilian-born people to join the academy. As the third glanced around the table at the gathered clan heads, Matriarch in Sume's case, and Kakashi, Inoichi sighed and argued, need I mention that Minato Namikaze was a civilian-born, which no one seems to get since once he became the 4th Hokage, he was given clan status. My vote is yes for promotion. So, Shikaku's vote is left. Regarding Narissa Suin's promotion, what are your thoughts? Hiruzen questioned the sullen Nara. On the level of a clan head, I think we shouldn't promote her yet, the half-lidded man replied, only to be slapped across the head by the blonde next to him. Personally, I'm fine with flipping a coin to decide. Hiyashi.san raises a crucial point regarding her abilities. She might become comfortable with her current skill set if we give her a promotion. But as we've already discussed, strength and ability aren't everything. Everyone in the group looked at Shikaku expectantly as he sighed and muttered, troublesome. He pulled out a shogi piece and flipped it, saying, heads, promote her. I think promoting her may be the smarter play here, Hokage. Sama, but I can't make a good assessment based on her single match. Yoshino Nara was sweeping calmly across the village when she glanced up at the Hokage tower. The woman paused, then swore aloud, now they have me saying it too. Why'd I feel like he's being troublesome again? Difficult men, she muttered indignantly. With a groan, Naruto turned over and wrapped his arm around nothingness. He blinked uncomfortably and looked at the half of the bed that had once been occupied by a particular brunette. Naruto.kun. A gentle voice said as Naruto turned to face the door and saw Hinata there, carrying a tray with a tiny bowl and plastic cutlery. Naruto grinned at his girlfriend as she approached him, seated in the chair beside the bed, and balanced the tray on her lap while opening the plastic blue gelatin cup. As the Hyuga's cheeks turned red, the blonde said, Hey Hinata-chan, I got worried for a second when I couldn't find you. I hate being in hospitals, but at least you're here with me to make it enjoyable. The blonde went on, but Hinata silenced him by shoving a spoonful of blue gelatin into his mouth. It's not nice to shove things into people's mouth, what if I didn't like the taste, and I couldn't even spit it out? The orange. Loving boy pouted at the blushing Hyuga, swallowing loudly. How would you like it if I stuck something in your mouth? He asked, as Hinata's face turned redder, if that was possible, before Naruto killed her. As Hinata fainted, a tiny trickle of blood escaped from her nose, turning her face atomic red. Hinata-chan, are you alright? He worriedly asked, but all he got in return was a familiar giggle from the unconscious brunette. To make matters worse, he had enjoyed the gelatin despite his protests, but he was confined to the bed where Hinata had fainted over his arms, making it impossible for him to reach the tiny cup that was just out of reach. Alright, let's go on to the second round of competitors since I believe that's the first round down. First up, we have. He was cut off when the doors flew open and a number of people rushed into the room. We just got word that you were having a meeting discussing the prospective Chunin, Hamaru replied. Kaharu gave a nod. Yes, we as your advisors, can't allow you in good conscience to have this meeting without us present. Additionally, Bylaw 72, subparagraph 3, which declares that all meetings are public after a village security breach, makes this an open forum. As he brushed past Sarutobi, who snarled under his breath, Danzo remarked, regardless of privacy, Bylaw 6, paragraph 2 also states that all clan heads must be present or have appointed proxies on matters that concern more than 3 different clans in the same matter. Danzo was imitating the hand seals to summon his faithful boss Summon Enema. Therefore, the Senju, Sarutobi, Kurama, and Aburame clans are not present, even though the Uchiha may have a designated proxy. As everyone in the room began to look thoughtfully, Danzo pointed out, you are the only authorized proxy for the Senju clan, which means you cannot represent the Sarutobi clan, nor act as the Hokage for this matter. What happened to Shibi.san? Though no one said it, the question was raised collectively. How could they have failed to notice the clan head performing the worm on the council table? There was no credible response. As he left for the nearby office, the third hissed, fine, pinching the bridge of his nose to avoid the looming headache. We'll take a short break while I summon my son to represent the Sarutobi clan. The blonde asked his girlfriend, who flushed at his undivided focus on her, Hey Hinata-chan, what happened at the end of our match? I started losing consciousness, but the last thing I remember was a kunai heading for my head. Naru.kun, after you fell on your face, I was proclaimed the winner. Genma.san declared me the winner because, despite my intense belief that you would defeat me, I was able to prevent myself from fainting after our match. However, as soon as I felt a genjutsu cast over the crowd, everyone fell silent. Kabuto, the boy we met prior to the exams who had the cards, was actually Orochimaru's traitor who attempted to enter the village. He threw a kunai at you, Kabuto, but before he could reach you, a wall of sand covered you. I saw Gaara on the field using his sand to subdue people. Naruto nodded and gave her a deep blue look as Hinata paused to catch her breath. I passed out from the stress of her battle after that, but when I awoke, I was informed that Jiraiya and Suna, who switched sides once Gaara began assisting us, had helped us repel the invading forces. Naruto gasped and tried to get up to find his Gigi, but Hinata held him down with her body weight, demonstrating both his weakness and her will to protect him. But I also heard the Hokage got hurt really badly during the fight against Orochimaru, something about being stabbed through the stomach and badly poisoned, the brunette continued. He is currently in a meeting. He has been cleared after 3 days, so he must be alright. Naru.kun. Please lay down again. As Naruto sighed and lay back down, Hinata reprimanded him. You're still too weak to be up and about without supervision. Hinata nodded and reached over to pick up one of the bowls on the tray so she could continue feeding him. Naruto, who didn't have the heart to remind her that he couldn't be burned, but had never tried swallowing fire before, scooped it up in a plastic spoon and saw that it was now mashed potatoes as she brought it to her lips, blowing gently to ensure they were cool so he didn't burn himself. As he swallowed the first spoonful, he noticed that she had some on her nose. He leaned up and said, "You got some on you, Hina-chan." As he approached her face, a blush appeared on her face, and he began to gently kiss her nose, sucking the gravy off as she let out a loud eep, and fell backwards in surprise, scattering mashed potatoes all over the place. Naruto and Hinata were both staring at each other, their faces covered in deep red blushes as gravy dripped from their hair and faces, and a nurse came in a moment later, her eyes wide as she took in the scene. Hinata's sole reply, Naru.kun, you're supposed to warn me before you do that please, didn't help. A familiar face followed, with a calm expression on Jiraiya's face as he sat in the chair closest to the head of the table, while Sarutobi sat across from him. Sarutobi waltzed back into the room, pinching his nose. He paused at this point and resumed his thoughts a few moments later. My son is currently unavailable since he's in the hospital checking on his students as well as, in any case, since he is unable to attend this meeting, I will be acting as the Sarutobi head. On my way in, I happen to run into Jiraiya, who will be acting as a proxy for the Senju. With a level sigh, Hiruzen said, Kaharu can represent the Kurama clan, and either Danzo or Hamaru can fill in as my proxy as Hokage and the other can be Shibi's proxy, though it seems strange that he would not show up. The two elders exchanged a quick look before Danzo took the vacant seat at the head of the table and Hamaru moved around to sit in Shibi's lap. Alright, let's begin with Sakura Haruno. As the floor was open for discussion, Danzo said. When Jiraiya noticed that nobody was talking, she began the evaluation by saying, to be honest, I think it was just a bad match. All things considered. According to reports, the girl is a rising star in the genjutsu field, and as a result, some aspects start to fall short. However, given her performance on that field, I personally couldn't promote her, Jiraiya stated, expressing his thoughts to the gathered group. Hiyashi crossed his arms and looked at each person, judging how they took the assessment. I feel the same. That she didn't immediately forfeit when facing the Uchiha can only be barely forgiven on the basis that she didn't know if he'd unlocked his Sharingan, but the moment he used it she had no chance against him, someone trained in a clan's taijutsu style. Perhaps, but she was aware that he had unlocked his Sharingan because he had used it in the preliminaries. It wasn't very effective, but the information was there. But if she puts in the effort and buckles down, I think she might have some potential, the third said, while Danzo rolled his eyes. I apologize, Lord Hokage, but her potential does not allow us to promote her. If we promote her too soon and she is sent on a mission that is beyond her skill level and she is killed, what good is that potential? Inoichi sighed and turned to face his two teammates. It wouldn't matter if she could have become the first female Hokage if she gets killed when she had Chunin in too deep. You make a valid point when you say that she had no chance against the Uchiha, but it's undeniable that she lived as long as she did in spite of someone who, based on your reports, ought to have swept the floor with her. As the group looked at him with raised eyebrows, Shozu remarked, I think she may surprise you if she gets the promotion. Shozu, when did you start reversing people's statements? As his rotund teammate shrugged his shoulders, Inoichi spoke. To get back on track, there is truth to the idea of using pork rinds for brains. Sasuke Uchiha, the Rookie of the Year and the Uchiha heir, was up against civilian born Sakura Haruno, but she held her own and came up with a respectable plan that would have caused serious problems for the majority of the other players. Furthermore, she employed the Academy Taijutsu style, which is undoubtedly subpar, and it stopped him from using the Sharingan's primary purpose, which is to mimic the jutsu that their opponent uses. Sume began before Kakashi adopted the same line of reasoning. Yes, and she used the basic clone jutsu, the substitution jutsu, and the henge, all three the jutsu they needed to learn to graduate, meaning Sasuke got nothing new from their fight, besides the fact that she used the basics to try and cover the gap between their skills. Kakashi continued as Sume nodded and resumed the. In addition, she fought with her fangs and dodged with her more agile wolf form, using her henge to fight rather than hide. She modified one of her teammates' specialties to fit her own fighting style. As Kakashi nodded in agreement, Sume concluded, I'm impressed by her tenacity, and she has my vote of confidence. It's harder than it looks to fight as a wolf when in actual combat. Shortly after, he cried, me as well. Leaning back and crossing his arms behind his head, Shikaku began. These are all valid points, but to me it all still boils down to one thing. Did she have a working plan based on the prior knowledge that she could be facing against the Uchiha? And I would have to say no given the results. I'm not saying she didn't have a plan, but it clearly didn't take into consideration the two main things that went against her. His superior taijutsu style and his Sharingan, which negated her genjutsu advantage. Everyone stared in disbelief as Shikaku said, I think she would function much better in a team setup for now until she can find a way around those two disadvantages on her own. They had all expected a thorough evaluation, but Shikaku just pointed out the obvious weakness that they had all noticed by looking at her match. As all of this was happening, the elders had a brief conversation and reached a consensus. Hamaru said, I concur, and Kaharu repeated, as do I. And in my opinion, that makes the score 6-4 against Sakura Haruno's promotion to Chunin. Let's move on to Shino Aburame, who will be opening assessments next. Danzo spoke in a determined voice. Jiraiya began again with the same explanation. Once again, I have to say it was a bad match, up. He only won the first round because his opponent forfeited so he could have a chance to recover before his next match, but that fact didn't matter because he had to forfeit the next match before it could really start. I didn't get to witness either of those things, but I've heard that he has a good head for tactical training and that he probably possesses some skill with his clan jutsu. As the other clan heads nodded, Jiraiya rationally explained, so my vote is no again. As several other heads nodded in agreement, Kakashi responded, a good assessment with several true points, so I'm forced to concur with Jiraiya-san. I imagine he will do great next go around, and may even win depending on the competition, but unfortunately he won't be promoted this time around. Hamaru spoke in a monotone voice. Since it seems glib for Aburame-kun, I'll come out and say that his first match was every bit what I expected between two clan heirs, both regarded for their tactical planning, even if it did end with what was essentially a double knockout. Hiruzen said in a grandfatherly voice with a, well, let me just state that everyone agreed not to promote Aburame-kun, unless there is anything more to add. No one objected, so Danzo wrote down the notation. Alright, so that leads us to the finalists, who are all extremely strong competitors in their own right. As a result, I requested that Ibiki Morino interview the three finalists prior to the final match in order to evaluate their tactical planning. The third stated as the interrogator entered the room with 3 manila folders on the table and sat to the side, watching the assembled group of clan heads. When Hinata opened her eyes, she groaned softly and saw Naruto caressing her hair, as she had slept with him. She smiled at the blonde boy, blushing slightly from the intimacy, and saw his downturned lips. What's the matter, Naru-kun? He halted his stroking and turned to face her, his eyes brightening at her inquisitive expression as she asked. I just wish this moment could go on forever. As she gasped and wrapped her arms around him, squeezing him closer, he whispered, I wish I could just lay here and protect you so easily. Unfortunately, I despise hospitals, so we already have that against us, and a nurse stopped by while you were sleeping, and you seem to have fully recovered, and I can be released so long as you agree to watch after me for a few days to make sure I don't do something stupid like get in a fight. He went on as Hinata blushed, certain thoughts racing through her mind as she struggled to summon the courage to express her desires. As Naruto rolled to the side and pushed himself up, she trailed off, her bravery betraying her at the last second. Naru-kun, I wouldn't mind if you slept, and Anbu-san came by about 5 minutes ago. You just missed her in fact, with a message, she said. The sun-kissed boy, no, man now, Hinata informed herself mentally, stood up from the bed and stretched his arms into the air, saying, the Hokage wants to see you about your performance in the finals, and apparently he has something he needs from me as well, so I'll go with you. His paramour saw that his hospital gown was split down the back, giving her a perfect view of his uncovered butt as her face turned atomic red, and she fainted with blood from her nose and a line of drool dripping from the corner of her mouth. Hinata. Hina-chan. Looking around, Naruto shrugged on his coat, leaving his undershirt off as he quickly pulled his boxers and pants on, then looked at the sleeping Hinata as he caught her under her head and her knees as he lifted her effortlessly as he went out the window, carrying the brunette bridal style. He shouted as he rushed back to her side, gently shaking her as she refused to awaken. All right, let us begin with Sasuke Uchiha, the third place finisher. Talks are free, Danzo declared, resting on his staff while glancing at each of the other clan leaders in the room. I'll just state it bluntly because I'm at a loss for words. This boy is a disaster waiting to happen. With a fitting statement, Jiraiya placed the flimsy folder on the table. What? What does it mean that the boy, who was the favorite to win, advanced to the third round? As Jiraiya's gaze settled on the elder, Hamaru inquired. Yes, considering that he is the last Uchiha, his file reads like that of a self-centered, egocentric boy. He approaches the three-way fight with the tactic, quote, I'm a Uchiha I can't lose. He probably thought the same thing prior to his first 2 matches, in fact. This brat needs to be taught that if you don't have the requisite skills, your last name won't get you very far as a shinobi. It will only lead to your early demise. I would be supporting a self-appointed avenger who will betray this village, flee after his brother whenever he gets the chance, and attack anyone who stands in his way if I allowed him to be promoted. The other clan heads stared at Jiraiya in disbelief as he yelled, is this the same man who advocated peace for the shinobi nations? Although it pains me, I have to admit that he won't work with me or his teammates. It was painful for him to say these things about his student of a relation to Obito, but that same thought is what gave him strength. Let's not even get started on the fact that he used the curse seal of Orochimaru in the final round willingly, Kakashi said with a glittering eye. If Obito believed that his best friend approved of the obvious betrayal Sasuke was displaying simply because his name was Uchiha, he would turn in his grave. As Danzo snarled, Hiruzen remarked, well, I think we know how to vote now, all in favor of promoting the Uchiha. I would like to remind you that you are not the Hokage's representative on this council. The third grinned confidently as the grizzled man addressed his opponent. No one would vote to promote the Uchiha today, and if it weren't for Danzo's desire to use Sasuke, he would have agreed as he grimaced and pounded a gavel on the table. No need, I remember, I just thought we could move on to a genin who actually has a chance to get promoted. Sarutobi said as Danzo glanced around the table, seeing the steely eyes of the clan heads. As he looked through the female Hyuga's file, Danzo took a second folder from the stack and said, okay, the move to promote Sasuke Uchiha is denied, now on to the next applicant for promotion, Hinata Hyuga, which should be a calm discussion after the heated words about Uchiha.san. Alright, this appears to be far more capable. This is how a file belonging to a clan heir, or heiresses in this case, should appear. As several other clan heads nodded, Jiraiya read over the file and stated, in the first round, she realized her opponent was a close combat specialist and used a long-to mid-ranged approach to give herself an opening for her Juken. Although she didn't get an appearance in the second round due to her opponent forfeiting, so her file is smaller than I'd like, but she did use a good approach in her first match. Up, Inuichi said. Yes, but that fight in the last round is what I truly want to discuss. The different nobles who were watching were impressed by Hyuga-san's performance. She and Uzumaki.san collaborated effectively to defeat Sasuke.kun, particularly when he began to use the curse seal. Sume grinned and remarked, I particularly enjoyed how she made her whip chakra conductive to work well with her clan jutsu. Speaking of which, did she create the jutsu moves she used in her battles with the Uchiha and Uzumaki.san? I've never seen a Hyuga employ those techniques before. In any case, you trained her well, Hiyashi.san. Chozu remarked jokingly as Hiyashi scowled, though it was impossible for anyone to tell because he always appeared to be frowning. She refused my assistance after the preliminary training, stating that she would train herself, even though I didn't train her. She was sparring with the Uzumaki, which I discovered when I had a branch member follow her. Additionally, she gave him insider knowledge about the Byakugan and let the Uchiha know about its flaws. Hiyashi clenched his fist and spat out. As he recalled one of the few occasions he had witnessed his sensei and Kushina fighting side by side, Kakashi trailed off, yes, but watching them working like that, nearly mirroring each other's movements exactly when facing all those clones, it reminds me of the silver-haired Junin was fully convinced after witnessing Naruto and Hinata's display that they would go to the ends of the elemental nations to protect the other. As Sarutobi's words sank in, silence fell over the council until someone finally raised their voice. I think you all missed the points that despite sparring over the break with Naruto.kun and facing Sasuke.san for most of the final match, she still managed to defeat her teammate and win the whole thing. Are you all in favor of Hinata Hyuga being promoted to Chunin? That settles it, Hinata Hyuga is promoted to Chunin, and now we have the final prospective Chunin, Naruto Uzumaki, said Danzo as nearly everyone's hands rose, with the exception of Hiyashi's. If nothing else, the boy deserves a promotion because of his battle with Gaara.san, which made it possible for him to easily turn away the invading Otto. As several other clan heads nodded in agreement, Sume noted, but we can't give him a field promotion like that because it's not wartime. Let's examine this objectively. In his debut, he faced off against Neji Hyuga, the Rookie of the Year before and a recognized prodigy of the Hyuga clan. Even though he prevailed, I don't like his strategy because he used up what must have been a significant amount of chakra to maintain that shadow clone. In addition, he tried to engage in a taijutsu battle against a Hyuga. You can't ignore those two factors. With most of the clan heads nodding in agreement, Hamaru yelled as he threw Naruto's file onto the table. Kakashi stepped in on behalf of his student, saying, "That's true, but as you pointed out, he won." Whether or not it was a bad tactic should only be heavily considered if he had failed in it. Although I agree that it was stupid to engage a Hyuga in taijutsu, he demonstrated that his style was on par with or better than Neji's, and by engaging Neji in a fight that he believed he could win with ease, Naruto was able to strike him multiple times, weakening Neji as a whole. Kakashi read the file in his hands and remarked, "And as for that shadow clone, I would agree that he probably would have wasted a lot of chakra on it." "What does would have mean to you? Would you like to share anything with the rest of us, Kakashi-san?" Shikaku inquired. Jiraiya lowered the file on his apprentice and said, "I think I would be the better one to answer that question, Nara-san. I helped train the boy over the break in the art of seals, and he made considerable progress, which was expected given his name's reputation. He presented me with a theoretical idea to enhance his shadow clones during the last week, which is briefly discussed in this file." As some of the clan heads who knew the fundamentals of seals widened their eyes, Jiraiya explained, he theorized that if he applied a seal to his clones similar to the ones on a storage scroll, he could store chakra at a steady rate over time, allowing it to become a sort of chakra battery which would feed the shadow clone while leaving his own stores relatively untouched since he would allow himself time to recover. Shikaku recognized the line of reasoning Naruto's two supporters had established and said, "So with that considered, in his first match, he managed to beat his opponent by laying a trap and allowing his opponent to overestimate his own skills. I want to discuss that fight in the second round because I believe we've talked about the boy's merits enough in the first. It made me think of two wolves fighting for alpha rights." Shozu laughed at Sume's enthusiasm as she gazed excitedly into the distance. Hiyashi cut Kakashi off as he began, saying, "Yes, let's discuss his efforts in the second round against Gaara-san. When the Kasuke's child started using his Biju's powers, that disrespectful brat put us all in danger by refusing to give up." The Hyuga muttered angrily, "If we won't promote any of the others for such things, then he shouldn't for Uzumaki either." It was a reckless attempt at showboating that easily could have backfired. Once again, Kakashi attempted to defend his sensei's son, but Hiruzen abruptly cut him off as everyone fell silent, aware that the third preferred the blonde boy. I agree that it was reckless and easily could have gotten out of hand. If that were all, I would have intervened and called off the match myself. However, I was taken aback when Naruto defeated the one-tailed Shukaku, something I doubt I could accomplish, at least not in a single blow. But I can't let him get away with what he did. With a sorrowful expression on his face as he was compelled to admit that it wasn't Naruto's best moment, Sarutobi remarked, "If it weren't for the fourth's improvements to our arena, Naruto would have put the entire village in danger by preventing Jiraiya and I from intervening right away and defeating the Biju." On that note, Jiraiya began, at last able to interrupt Naruto's beating. "Has anyone here thought that he knew the arena was protected and therefore saw no danger in continuing the fight?" The white-haired Sanin, who was in charge of the finalists' psychological assessments, inquired as Inoichi's expression shifted to one of contemplation. It would suit Naruto's disposition. "Nevertheless, we cannot support his behavior because he was permitted to act recklessly on the battlefield. We came out of the invasion with few casualties because, as Inuzuka-san noted, he subdued the Biju. Therefore, any actions taken after the Kasuke's son started losing control of his Biju should be disregarded. I won't consider them as negative actions only because," Danzo stated, making a crucial choice because he wanted the boy kept as a genin so he could control him more easily. Next, let's examine how he gained an elemental advantage by using fire to combat Gaara's sand. Extremely high temperatures would be needed to transform the sand into glass, and a simple Kaiden jutsu would not provide him with those temperatures. I can speak from experience when I say that anything lower than B rank wouldn't have that effect, and even then, he would need to either pour chakra into his jutsu or have a strong fire affinity to get such a result, Kakashi noted, determined to defend Naruto. True, but if you look at it from that viewpoint, the boy would have to have practically drowned that massive attack that took down the one-tail with chakra. I'm not saying that like it's a bad thing. Using anything than that would be deadly when dealing with a Biju, even one currently contained in a child, Shikaku said as others nodded in deep reflection. In an attempt to keep some of the others from giving the blonde Jinchuriki's strategies too much thought, Danzo said, "And with that, shall we move on to the final round?" Sume said, "What is there to talk about? The kid did everything right." The Inuzuka matriarch's thoughts about the blonde caused some people to smile. The boy needed to use a significant amount of chakra for his jutsu to affect the one-tail, as Nara.san just mentioned. Following that, Hamaru quickly silenced the wolfish woman. Going up against one of the two distinct inheritors of the great dojutsu clans in the village would be considered a suicide mission outside of the arena, and going up against two would not only get himself killed but also a team he was commanding. Nevertheless, he outlasted Sasuke and mounted a formidable defense against Hinata. Don't get me wrong, you have a valid point, but you fail to consider that Naruto would have a team to help him defeat his opponents in the real world. In addition, he was able to persuade one of his enemies to assist him in defeating the rival. As Kaharu tisked at the observation, Kakashi countered, by your estimations, he shouldn't have been able to function after that level of chakra consumption. Kaharu.san, do you disagree? Jiraiya noticed that Kakashi's argument was being disregarded. Without holding back, the elder reprimanded the Junin, saying, I can't take Hitaki's assessment seriously considering he's the brat's sensei, of course he'd think highly of him. Inoichi fired back, followed shortly after by the lone Sannin in attendance. That's accurate, Kakashi.san is Naruto's sensei, as well as Hinata's and Sasuke's, of all of us, he's the most biased, and unbiased in this discussion considering he also agreed with our assessment to forego promoting the Uchiha. And as if you have enough space to speak, you refuse to even entertain the idea that Naruto might possess the strength to be anything other than a genin. You'd better think he had a heart attack than Naruto beat him, Jiraiya spat angrily. I think he could come in right now and drop my poisonous teammate's dead body on the table. Not to mention that he demonstrated incredible control over the ash he used in the battle and employed fire jutsu that Sasuke couldn't replicate with his Sharingan, both of which contradicted the report I got that said he had terrible chakra control. To be honest, his jutsu is what most interests me. Hiruzen stepped in to keep the conversation focused on Naruto and stop it from degenerating into a childish argument. Regarding his jutsu, is it just me or does it seem strikingly similar to the fourth Rasengan in the final battle with Hinata.san and at the conclusion of his first fight? Shozu inquired, and several heads looked at Jiraiya after pausing for a moment. If that's what the looks are about, I demonstrated the jutsu to him during the break. I told him that if he finished all of the material I had given him to study over the break, I wanted to teach it to him someday, but I was called away before I could do so. Though I believe it fits his abilities, it appears that he was able to create a jutsu using a similar construct. Jiraiya responded, keeping his gaze fixed on the scowling elder, if I had to rate it, I would place it at a high B rank to high A rank attack jutsu, which is yet another reason he deserves this promotion. During the brief pause, Danzo said, well, with that I think we should move on to the point of this discussion. I firmly oppose elevating the arrogant brat. No one was shocked, but Kaharu hissed. Hamaru was much more composed than his female teammate when he said, while not as violently, I agree with my teammate. Tsum's enhanced canines were on display as she grinned wolfishly and said, well, I'm all for promoting him. Hiyashi stated calmly, I deny promotion of the Uzumaki. However, anyone who looked at the Hyuga's head could see that he was furious. Jiraiya nodded beside Sarutobi as he stated, I vote to promote Naruto.kun to Chunin, I think he's earned it. The white-haired toad wielder concurred, saying, as do I. Kakashi crossed his arms and stated, and biased or unbiased, I likewise give my consent for Naruto's promotion. As the rest of the table turned to face the last three, Danzo remarked, I must agree with our advisors, the boy's actions were rash and certainly not the tactics of a Chunin I want leading a team. I see no reason why he shouldn't be allowed to be promoted to Chunin. I'd trust him to lead a team, Shozu said. Inoichi trailed off as he gazed down thoughtfully, I'd like to promote him, but, if we promote him, can we be absolutely certain that the older shinobi populace will accept him with his condition? Hiruzen winced at the accusation, but the platinum blonde said, yes, if it was just a question of him being worthy, but I can't in good conscience allow Naruto Uzumaki to lead a team of shinobi that weren't aware of his circumstances, so my vote is no. Given that the elder generation knew about Naruto's situation and could have done more harm to him anyhow, Inoichi had opposed the idea of hiding it from the younger generation. Well, I suppose that leaves me. The Nara nodded, albeit grudgingly, as he rose from the table. I say promote the boy, Shikaku said boredly. If what I hear is true, then he will make a fine addition to the Chunin populace and an even better leader considering how he studies his fellow shinobi's strengths and weaknesses. The old warhawk turned to go, silently dismissing the assembled council, saying, okay then, with that the motion to promote Naruto Uzumaki to Chunin is approved. Hiruzen called an ANBU, a purple-haired one with a long blade at her side, as she rose from the table and made her way back to his office in the adjacent room. Neko. Could you head to the Konoha Medical Center and tell Naruto and Hinata Hyuga that I wish to see them, and that I have an important matter to discuss with Naruto-kun? The cat. Masked Anbu nodded in agreement as she disappeared into the shadows, determined to finish her mission as soon as possible before her Hokage's voice interrupted her. The purple-haired Anbu nodded again briefly, silently thanking the Sarutobi head for allowing her to check on her friend. Oh yes, Neko, while you're there, could you also check on Hayate-san? He felt his companion stir as she regained consciousness as Naruto landed on a roof on his way to the Hokage Tower, which was on the other side of the village. He paused to gently set her down and smirked at the brunette as she arrived, blushing as she recalled what had caused her to faint. Good morning, drowsy head. How was your nap? As Hinata pushed herself up and pouted at her boyfriend's playful remarks, Naruto asked rhetorically, even though he was there in a flash to offer his arm as a brace while she worked the blood back into her legs. Hinata nodded, tensing her legs as she leapt away, and Naruto responded with a petulant, "Oh." The Hyuga girl smirked back, sticking out her tongue as Naruto's eyes widened in shock as he bent over and forced more speed out of his still injured body. After you fainted, I couldn't wake you, so I just decided to carry you to the Hokage's tower. Well, when the couple finally made it to the Hokage Tower's roof, Hinata had defeated her boyfriend by a not.so subtle margin, but the blonde was not satisfied with that and landed behind her, lightly tackling her to the ground while grinning superiorly. Observing the closeness of their faces, he leaned down to kiss the brunette, but her finger pricked him in the nose, pushing him away. As Naruto disappeared, she said arrogantly, "Nope, you lost, and only winners get kisses." He then reappeared at the edge of the roof, crouching down and pressing his index fingers together while a cloud of darkness hung over his head. "What did you do with my shy, cute girlfriend, and who are you?" Naruto pouted as he asked. Hinata, hardly able to contain her blush and rising giggles at Naruto's whispered compliment, said, "I don't know what you're talking about, Mr. Second Place. So, if only winners receive kisses, then you are also eligible for them, correct?" As he got to his feet, Naruto asked, looking directly into Hinata's eyes as she smirked, which was strange for her normally innocent face. With a slight sway in her hips, she approached him and put her arms around his neck. She then stood on her tiptoes to kiss him and whispered, "I like the way you think." A familiar voice, accompanied by the distinctive scratching of pencil on paper and a muted and perverted giggle, asked, "Are you lovebirds going to hang out on the roof a little while longer, or do we need to rent you a room?" Kya. As Jiraiya was flung off the side, still writing in his perverted notebook as he fell towards the ground below, Hinata lost her arrogant poise and spun around, hurling a juken palm without hesitation. The perverted giggles continued even after he hit the ground, sending a plume of dust flying from the impact. Yes, the kid's a practical goldmine of material, and the Hyuga girl, such soft hands. Back on the roof, Hiruzen's perspiration fell as he looked over the edge at the impact below, and he shook it off, sealing his hand quickly and disappearing in a whirl of leaves, probably to his office below, Naruto thought, while Hinata was crying at her attack on one of the Sannin, and instead of telling her that Jiraiya deserved it, he just grabbed her sleeve and pulled her autonomous body down the stairs to the penultimate floor, which housed the council chambers and the Hokage's office. Sarutobi sat down slowly in the Hokage chair, trying to conceal the wince as his wounds flared up, while Naruto stood at mock attention, pushing Hinata's still spaced body as she let out a low whining noise. It would appear that despite his maturity during the battle, he was still the same child underneath it all. Hiruzen began, "I guess I'll open by saying that the council has decided to promote Hinata Hyuga to the rank of Chunin, should she so accept." Naruto grinned broadly and shook Hinata. "Hina. Haim, you made Chunin. You hear that? I told you that after that incredible fight in the finals, they would have no option but to promote you." The display made Hiruzen smile, half joyfully as he recalled a young Naruto, and half sorrowfully as he recalled an almost identical display by Kushina when Minato was chosen as the fourth. Naruto exclaimed, waving his arms around crazily. Hinata muttered, "Hi," as she accepted the vest that was held out to her, but Hiruzen glanced sorrowfully at Naruto. "Unfortunately, I don't exactly have a vest for you, Naruto." Sarutobi stopped to see how Naruto would react, but the boy didn't even seem to hear him as he started to command Hinata to try on her new vest. Hinata seemed to be paying attention, letting her head drop as the third, and probably Naruto as her target, heard her say, "I'm sorry, Naruto-kun. I know you really wanted to make it to Chunin." The Hyuga heiress appeared to have lost all her light as she looked up at Naruto's face, expecting him to be reflecting her dejected expression, but was taken aback by Naruto's broad smile. "I meant what I said during the exams earlier. Even if they decide to keep me as a genin until the 4th Shinobi War is over, I will still accept Gigi's hat." Without a shred of hesitation, Naruto said. Nevertheless, following much discussion, the council decided to promote you as well, Naruto-kun. I don't have a vest for you, but I do have this. The third Hokage said. I hope you'll understand once you read it, as he opened a secret drawer on his desk and took out a small scroll that was embossed with red wax and had the whirlpool seal that everyone in the room could recognize. When he finally ran his finger over the seal, he felt the wax and was unaware of a small cut on his finger and a drop of blood filling the wax seal as it glowed briefly before fading away. Naruto took the scroll with reverence, examining it as though he were holding a live bomb. He paused, looking to his partner, who nodded, urging him on. When he opened the scroll, he suddenly started crying and turned away from Hinata, falling onto the couch on the wall. The only thing he could say was a low, muttered apology, and Hinata heard the boy give a cracking gasp. She hurried after him, sitting next to him and giving him a hug in an effort to take away whatever was hurting him. Hinata only needed to glance at the unfolded scroll to comprehend his tears and broken sobs. To my Sochi.kun from your Ka.san, I suppose I should begin by asking that you not hold Sarutobi.og responsible for keeping this from you, dear Naruto. But if you possess even a small part of my personality, you will not listen. I wish you didn't have to learn this way because I don't know what justification was offered for your lack of parents while all of your friends had them, but know that your father and I loved you very much, Sochi. Having said that, I've come to the realization that you still won't recognize me. My name is Kushina Uzumaki, the clan head of the Uzumaki clan, which, if you're reading this letter, means that title now belongs to you. All of the Uzumaki clan's belongings, which isn't much, are sealed at the bottom of this letter because that's what I took with me when I was forced to leave Uzushio at the end of the Second Shinobi War. As the clan head and one of the last surviving members of the Uzumaki clan, I can now address you as your Ka.san, even though I know I have no right to call myself that in your eyes because we all but abandoned you at birth when we died. I hope you will forgive us and one day understand why we did what we did, but you will never be able to comprehend why we did it because it means you both found a lovely and wonderful wife. She must be for my Sochi.kun, and had the ideal child, and you both had to make sacrifices to save the village and your child. Tears smudged Hinata's eyes, making it difficult to read the next few lines. I know you're probably asking yourself, why me? Why not someone else? The answer is right in your blood. A curse I regrettably passed on to you. You see, Uzumakis are naturally strong chakra. Wise, so the burden has always been carried by one of them. First Mito Uzumaki, who I hope you recognize as the first Hokage's wife and my surrogate mother when I arrived in Konoha. She then passed the burden on to me, and I regrettably to you. I can hear the battle outside, and I'm too weak by now to search the house for more paper, so I'll try to wrap this up quickly. The reason me and your father asked Sarutobi.og to keep our identities a secret from you was done for two reasons. The first is if that blasted council found out that you were a pure-blooded Uzumaki, they would probably try to enforce the CRA on you. If you never find out what that is, then at least we could leave you that present. The other part was due to what your heritage carries. During the Third Shinobi War, one earned quite a reputation as Konoha's bloody red habanera, on top of the fact that I survived the destruction of Uzushio by Iwa, Kumo, and Kiri. My bounty grew immensely in Iwa, not as big as your father's you understand, but no one's bounty could compare to his anyways. This is why I ask Sarutobi, OJI to keep this scroll until you reach Chunin, as I'm sure you can guess no. He also has a letter from your father as well, but I ask for you to please not look at it until you're much stronger than Chunin. Hopefully stronger than a Junin as well, but if you take after me, you'll probably demand the letter right now, Databane. It was difficult to read the finally section, but both Hinata and Naruto could clearly see the final four words as the descending light struck the scroll, and she gasped when she realized for the first time that the ink was crimson rather than black as was customary, explaining why the handwriting was shaky the longer the letter went on. Sochi, I adore you. As previously stated in the letter, beneath that was a straightforward sealing matrix. However, Naruto chose not to open the contents at that moment, instead wiping away the tears that were streaming from his eyes as he approached the opposite side of the Hokage's desk. Is that all there is to it? He was able to escape. Though neither Hiruzen nor Hinata were entirely sure if he understood the mission, Sarutobi stated bluntly, I don't want to keep you any longer than necessary, but I do have a mission for you as a newly branded Chunin. I need you to go with Jiraiya to retrieve my final student Tsunade and bring her back to replace me as Hokage. Naruto nodded slowly in acceptance. When are we going to depart?